I've been on and off, I think 3 times now. I'm getting a message on the screen saying I have a unstable network connection. So if I go off again, you know what it is.
Thank you, Robin.
Okay, fair enough, Robin. Thanks for that. Are members aware of any apologies?
Just the chair.
Chair. Okay. Thank you. Item number 2 is chairperson's business. The 2.1, the independent review of education panel appointment. I'd refer members to correspondence from the Minister of Education at page 4 of the tabled papers, and the terms of reference for the panel at page 6 of tabled papers. I'm asking members' agreement for the committee to write to the Minister seeking more information on the panel. Are members content to note that?
I'm off video.
Yes, Chair, content with that.
Okay. And I've received a text from the Chair himself asking that we invite the panel to the committee as soon as possible. Would members be in agreement with that?
Content.
Yeah, content.
Agreed. Okay. Item 3, draft minutes. Refer members to draft minutes of the committee meeting of the 22nd of September 2021 at page 6 of their meeting packs. Our members agreed that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Item 4, matters arising. There are no matters arising. So, item number 5 is the 14 to 19 strategy, an oral briefing by Pivotal Public Policy Forum NI. Could I ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove all members from the spotlight and add the witnesses?
The witnesses haven't joined the call just yet. Chair, I'm keeping an eye here on the participant list.
I suppose we're a bit ahead of ourselves, are we?
We are slightly ahead of ourselves, actually.
Do we want to move on to correspondence, Clark? Or
Yes, we can. Yes, we can indeed, Chair.
Okay. Might as well.
Okay.
So, if we move to item 6, correspondence, refer members to page 34, where we have 7 items of correspondence. A summary note is included at page 35. Item 6.2 at page 37 is correspondence from DAERA on a consultation on the NI Food Strategy Framework. Item 6.3 at page 78 is correspondence from the Committee for Finance about the 3-year budget setting process. And item 6.4 at page 81 is correspondence from the Committee for Finance providing forecast and outturn information for August provided by the Department of Finance. Any issues on any of that correspondence? No?
No. Just the one from DAERA is interesting. There's the first mention that we've seen of the Sustainable Development Goals in policy making here, which is a really interesting development because those are UN targets that the entire jurisdiction is signed up to, and they should come through to help the progressive targets towards sustainable development in lots of different ways. Sorry, go ahead, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Clark. Item 6.5 at page 102 is correspondence from the Committee for Finance about additional funding for the unique circumstances of Northern Ireland provided under NDNA. Are members content to write to the Department about spending proposals regarding this funding? Content?
Content.
Yeah, content.
Item 6.6 at page 108 is a response from AQE to the committee's invitation to attend a meeting, indicating that it would be unable to attend due to their current workload. Both AQE and PPTC were invited to brief the committee at its meeting on the 29th of September 2021. PPTC have not responded yet to the request. AQE had previously responded on the 30th of June 2021 to an earlier request of the committee, indicating it would look to arrange a meeting with the committee along with PPTC after the summer recess. AQE have also provided the latest version of their frequently asked questions for members' information. Have members any views on that correspondence?
Just quickly, I was like to say, I think that's really poor. Actually, they should definitely be coming up in front of the committee, especially with the hearsay anyway, with the changes to academic selection and the testing process and coming up. So I really think they should be coming up before the committee.
Just on that, I have contacted the Governing Bodies Association about the new, what those new arrangements might be, and they, are of the view that it's outside of their remit. So we'll look at who can come to the committee and brief about that.
Yeah.
If members are content with that.
He's not there. Where's he?
Okay, thanks for that, Chair. Sorry, so just before we move on again, in terms of the one talk that one test is being made available, AQE and PPTC, going by the news reports anyway, have agreed on just the one single test. Have we any more information on that, Clark?
No, not at the moment, Chair. I believe that a new grouping will be set up to take that forward, and it's not in place yet. And in the meantime, certainly the Governing Bodies Association has said that they're not cited to brief it. So I'll get back to the department and see who might be best placed.
Okay. I would suggest that as soon as we get some more information, or as soon as a new organisation is established, that we invite them to come and present to the committee as soon as possible. Okay. Item 6.7 at page 116 is correspondence from the BITES project, informing the Committee of research it commissioned along with YMCA Ireland and youth initiatives to establish the nature and extent of work carried out by youth work providers in the community and voluntary sector. A report on the research is due early November 2021, and they request an opportunity to present their findings to the committee in December 2021. Are members content to note and consider a briefing once the report has been released?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 6.8 at page 119 is correspondence about the independent review of education and the appointment of its chair and panel members. We've already dealt with that. Are members content to dispose of the correspondence as per the summary note at page 35 with the above exceptions? Is this agreed?
Agreed, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Are the witnesses with us yet, Avian?
They're still not on the call. They'd have been given 9:45 as a start time, I think, Chair. So
will we move on to the forward work programme?
Sure.
Okay, item 7, members, forward work programme. The draft forward work programme at page 121. Are members happy to endorse that forward work programme?
One point, Chair. Just 1 point.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's probably directed more towards Avian, if that's okay, Chair. And if
Sure.
Chris was here, it'd be good. Just, I don't know what the appetite is. I'd suggested about 3 weeks ago about if we're going to consider maybe doing the committee out and about. I'd put forward Dromore High School, not County Tyrone, just to reinforce it's Dromore County Down, in case anybody gets excited. Not that there's anything wrong with Tyrone. There's a lot going on there at the minute. But if there'd be an appetite for us to look at dates to pop in, to start to populate, maybe we could be a bit more mobile, or maybe we're not at that stage yet. Just if there's anything with the members, whether they're interested.
Oh, so Robbie, I did check out with committee and member services whether any visits have taken place so far, and I've got a draft risk assessment, a sample risk assessment. One visit has taken place certainly by the DAERA committee, and it was to an outdoor setting because obviously we're still very conscious of the need for distancing, and everyone needed to travel separately and all of that kind of thing. But members want to put a provisional date in the diary for a first visit, and we can start to get the logistics arranged for that. Just there would be limitations on what you can do, and an outdoor one might be preferable.
Well, just Clerk Chair, a lot of these restrictions have now been lifted around social distancing, etc. So, we're expecting moving. It's the same, not this committee in particular, but of the same issue with the Assembly Chamber. We're still separated, but expecting children to be squashed into a classroom 30 at a time. So, I think we need to be, if we're expecting others to do it, we need to be leading from the front.
Chair, could I come in there? I must say I agree that it is really important to get out and about and meet school leaders in their setting. And I would agree with Robbie that we should do that as something, as a matter of priority, and normalise the way we do business.
So,
Okay.
members, list of visits, if you scroll down your forward work programme, there's a list of visits. Oak Grove Integrated, an Irish medium school called Bunskull on Ur, Sure Start Provision in Armagh, St Dimtna's Primary School, Dromore High School, Struel Shared Education Campus, Omagh Sure Start, CCA Headquarters, Lochshore Educational Resource Centre, Curry Primary, Access Employment Limited Larne, and the Northern Ireland Forest School Association. So where would you like to go first?
I'm not seeing more on that list, David. Maybe I've got the wrong list, have I?
There's no one. I'm typing that on now, actually, Robbie.
Listen, last week as well. Didn't want to mention it.
Beg your pardon.
What page is that list? Sorry, Evelyn.
So the forward work programme, when you scroll down from the tabular part of it, you'll see headings of other things that the committee also wants to do, time permitting, and there's a list of visits.
I agree with Diane. I think it's very important that we have a priority visit as soon as possible. I believe we should be visiting a special school because those are the schools that have been borne the burden of the trauma associated with this pandemic for children, teachers and staff and parents. I think it's very important that we make a visit there as soon as possible with all the safety precautions in place as appropriate.
So a special school, okay. Members, I'll look into the logistics of that and try to come back to you next week with availability for a special school and for Dromore High School. Okay.
Okay, fair enough, members.
Chair, if I could make a brief suggestion, it'd be good if West Tyrone was at the top of that pile, just so you can see how bad the A5 is as well, and that's 2 scores in one go.
Have you been watching There's No Place Like Tyrone, Daniel?
That mightn't be a good thing. I mightn't make it that far.
Okay, we'll just move on quickly to item 8. Any other business? Have members any other business they want to deal with? No? Okay. Well, I think our witnesses are ready at the minute, so I'll ask for members to be taken out of the spotlight and witnesses. Sorry, give me 1 second to get my brief here. Ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove all the members from the spotlight and add the witnesses. And I'd just refer members to a pivotal report on education, skills and training for young people aged 14 to 19 at page 15, and an updated report in the tabled papers. I'd like to welcome Miss Anne Watt, Director of Pivotal, and Mr. Ben Harper, Research Manager at Pivotal also. So I'd advise witnesses that the committee will give you 10 minutes to make an opening statement, and that will then be followed by questions from members. So the floor is yours. Who's kicking off? Anne, yourself?
I'm going to kick off, yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Can indeed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And can I say thank you to the committee for the invitation to attend today and to present our recent research about education and skills for 14 to 19-year-olds. So my name is Anne Watt. I'm the Director of Pivotal, and with me is Dr. Ben Harper, who is our Research Manager. So I'm going to say a few opening remarks, but most of these introductory comments will be from Ben, talking about the report that we have just published. So Pivotal is an independent public policy think tank for Northern Ireland. We're just about 2 years old, and we operate outside of politics, so we have no political alignment, and we also operate outside of government. And our aim is to promote better public policy here through encouraging more use of evidence in policy making and by enabling more people to have a say on public policy issues. So to that end, we do projects on particular policy issues, we publish reports, and we facilitate discussion and input into policy discussions. So this new report that we published just yesterday on education and skills for 14 to 19-year-olds is a good example, I suppose, of both of those things. So it's looking at the evidence of what works in education for that age group, and it's also getting views and ideas from young people themselves. You have, I think, in front of you 2 reports. We published a report yesterday where we summarised the research we'd done with 300 young people. And then previous to that, we published a policy review report back at the end of 2020. So there's 2 separate reports, although they are connected to each other. So the big headlines that we've come up with in that report are young people are telling us they want to learn more about employability and life skills at school rather than just being coached to do exams. The second area is young people said they wanted more innovative and accessible careers advice. And the third area was raising of the profile of vocational options rather than the more traditional academic routes. And Ben is going to talk more about each of those things in a minute. So really good to be here today. I think it's important for us as a policy think tank to have an influence and an impact with the work that we do. So there are 2 particular areas that I'd highlight that where we would like the research and the ideas that we've come up with to have an impact. So the first one is the new strategy on 14 to 19s that the Department for the Economy and the Department of Education are developing at the minute and are going to publish, I believe, in the next couple of months. So we've had some good conversations with the officials who are working on that strategy, and we would like this research we've done with young people in the real world telling us about their real experiences to have an influence on the decisions that are made in that strategy document. And then secondly, and perhaps in slightly longer term, we would like this research to have an influence on the independent review of education that the panel was just announced for a couple of days ago. So we'll be seeking to make sure we meet with that panel and tell them what we've heard from young people about their experiences of the 14 to 19 education system. But I'm going to hand over to Dr. Ben Harper, who will talk in a little bit more detail about this research.
Great, thank you, Anne. I'm just going to try and share my screen here. Hopefully that will be pretty straightforward. Great, okay, so hopefully everybody can see the slides. Any issues, just let me know. I'm very conscious of members' time, so this is an overview, I guess, of our key findings that will hopefully guide discussions and questions. Just a quick overview of our data collection. We were really keen to try and engage as many young people, parents, carers and stakeholders as possible. As Anne mentioned, we worked alongside the joint project leads from the Department of Education and the DFE who were working on the 14 to 19 strategy. So as you can see here, there's a range of young people, a range of parents, carers, and they were across schools and also young people who weren't in mainstream education or in education at all. So I'm going to present the 5 main themes and then hopefully we can discuss those in more depth. The first theme here is I've tried to pull out in each slide one of the main takeaway messages and also solutions that young people and parents came up with, as well as employers. I guess the first theme was about we were really interested in how do people develop employability and life skills, given the emphasis on reinvigorating the economy, given the multiple reviews of education. We were really keen to think, where do young people believe they obtain the best experience on employability and life skills? The percentages here are from over 235 participants and multiple answers were permitted, just in case you're wondering why they don't add up in terms of the percentages. But what you'll see here, and this is a really good theme to kind of hold in mind throughout this discussion, is that family are very important. So as many of us would know, family is a big influence on young people's decisions to choose certain careers or skills, but also on their wider life skills. So involving the family unit is extremely important as we begin to move forward and think about possible policy changes. On the right here, you'll see some solutions that our young people and parents came up with. There is this overall theme of trying to spend more time within mainstream education or otherwise on real-world learning, be that work placements, better relationships with employers and schools, and developing this real ethos of life skills within education. We recognise that could be quite difficult given the demanding nature of the content in the curriculum, and we might touch on that in a bit. The second theme then was exploring the experience of careers, guidance and advice. There's quite a bit of information there. I think what's really important when we did this research is that there are many examples of excellent careers advice. Pivotal is about developing evidence that creates the really innovative solutions and working alongside stakeholders. So this isn't to criticise people providing careers advice now, but what we did notice with young people and carers is that the majority of people felt that guidance could be improved. And one of the major issues for young people and parents with additional needs was the need to have more career support over an advanced period of time, and it being much more practical, so having much more practical work experience for people with additional needs. This second solution is a very consistent theme to our work and a real challenge, I guess, developmentally of how you respect young people's developmental need and right for autonomy as they sort of, particularly towards the 16, 17-year-old age, but also recognising that young people live with parents and carers. And it's very important to involve those in a way that feels appropriate to the young person, but also in a way that can best support their future development. Another significant theme in our research was the need for careers guidance to be much more aspirational, to move beyond the sort of traditional lawyer, banking, doctor, and to be much more innovative. And I've got a bit more information to talk about that. So third theme then was exploring the understanding of career pathways in the labour market. We included these questions because we think it's really important to understand the baseline of young people's perceptions of what's available and the current growth areas or decline areas and their parents. And what you'll see here, hopefully you can read this okay, is that 69% of young people knew little to nothing about areas of growth and decline in the labour market. Young people felt quite disconnected about future planning, and I wonder really if that reflects this complex landscape of options. There's a real tendency amongst young people to go for traditional subjects and choices. And this is particularly problematic when these options are not available. So, for example, kids with additional needs, kids on the periphery of mainstream. It really highlights the need for parental involvement and for parents, carers to feel upskilled and informed of the best options for their child or young person. And so again, linked to sort of solutions here, we've got clear guidance on areas of growth and decline, recognising that that's very difficult, you know, in the sense that if you've got young people at 12, 13, we can't forecast what the growth areas will be in 10 years' time or 7 years' time when they hit the employment market, but there has to be some sort of middle ground. And we were really interested in this idea of train the trainer initiatives with local employers, whereby experts in industry come out and work with teachers and community leaders about areas where young people can work, areas where young people can contribute to. And I guess the fourth theme then, looking at attitudes towards further education and vocational pathways. One of the key stats here for us were that 58% of parents and carers knew little to nothing about apprenticeships. And if we think about that theme whereby parents are extremely influential in their young people's decision making, these two marry together in a concerning way. We were interested in young people's ideas around champions from further education. So quite a few young people said, we should get people who have went down the FE pathway to come back into school and inspire other young people. And this wider sense of increased visibility of further education within post-primary education seemed very important, and a targeted campaign to inform parents and carers of the diverse options within further education. What we find is there's a tendency for further education to be seen as a area where young people go and repeat Gcses and A-levels rather than really understanding the unique offerings and expertise in further education. Finally, we're really passionate and pivotal about engaging marginalised groups, and we met with young people who weren't in education, young people who had experience of local authority care, and young people who were being supported in between mainstream education and referral units. This stat here is drawn from wider government statistics on young people who are in mainstream education and those who have left care or who have experience of care. What you'll see here is a significant difference, and it really amplifies these issues whereby young people with less privilege are much more likely to poorly achieve within education. Some of the youth agencies that we worked with, and indeed teachers, highlighted that improved teacher training about the complex needs faced by young people with special educational needs and mental health may really support this issue. And also enhanced education for employers to recognise and value alternative educations. Some of our employers told us that whilst it's really good to have a range of diverse educational options, they sometimes find it hard to compare, particularly if you think about sort of the range of level 2 qualifications, which can be quite difficult to understand. We were also really interested in young people's views about increasing youth participation in advocacy work, acknowledging that young people themselves are best placed to articulate their needs and changes to policymakers. So using the evidence from young people, parents and wider stakeholders, we've come up with 3 high-level policy recommendations that I'm sure we'll discuss. But as you'll see there, the first one there around employability and skills training, having greater emphasis throughout the curriculum to prepare young people for life after education. Secondly, careers advice should be innovative, responsive and accessible to young people and parents' carers. And finally, the status of vocational education must be elevated through effective working across education providers. So that's me on that brief summary. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. That's me.
Okay. Anna, do you want to come back in on anything, or will we start the questioning?
No, I think go ahead into the questions and discussion. It's fine. Thank you.
Fair enough. Well, I'll just start then myself. It may be just a perception, and perhaps you may be able to confirm it or not. But in a structural sense, the education system in general seems to be weighted very much in favour of academic education, and then GCSEs, A levels, and then higher education, and further education and vocational training is seen in many ways as the poor second cousin. Is that something you would agree with? And is there anything that can be done to change that? Thanks.
Ben, do you want to answer that? I think probably you're better placed knowing the detail of the research.
Certainly. My immediate thoughts as you were talking is this sense of this very traditional culture we live in Northern Ireland, whereby we are, I guess, socialised to the sense of early assessment with the transfer tests. And then in many schools, the emphasis on attainment and assessment is very heavy from quite an early stage. So from maybe 14 young people are preparing or holding in mind GCSEs, then moving on to A levels and then higher education. I think the other issue that our research demonstrates is that young people, as I guess we know, being maybe some of us are our parents or who work with young people, are very influenced by their parents and carers. And so I think there's quite a large piece of work to work with parents and carers' mindsets around what good education or good training is, because what we find is that the newer areas of development, for example, cybersecurity, digital technology, advanced manufacturing, parents and carers were extremely wary of those options. So I think there's a big piece of work there. But I think there is a wider acknowledgement around the cultural issues that we experience in Northern Ireland and attitudes towards further education, whereby further education is very much seen still as a tech rather than its own unique identity.
I think that's right. And just to add to that, there was a lack of knowledge about vocational options from both young people and parents and carers. So there's a lack of knowledge, and therefore there was I suppose, an anxiety about those options, that they might not be as safe or as financially secure as the academic route. And actually, the irony there is that for some young people, the vocational route would be a much better choice and a much more secure choice, but they tend to be steered towards keeping on an academic path because that's what's familiar. And as Ben says, there's a lack of knowledge about the wider options, particularly in new areas of employment.
And where does the responsibility lie for that lack of knowledge? I mean, is it just that the system itself has found it very difficult to adjust, that it's not very agile, it's geared towards, and especially the grammar sector, it's geared towards examinations and then young people going to university to do degrees. And I mean, I have a perception also that most grammar schools, I'm not suggesting for a minute that all of them are the same, but they're very much geared towards the professions, as we would know, medicine, accountancy, law, all of the professions that maybe were in vogue 20, 30, 40 years ago at universities that everyone aspired to. But now there's a much broader range of career pathways that young people can follow. And is there, do you think, a problem in particular in grammar schools in terms of their agility to deal with all the new career pathways that are emerging?
Do you want me to answer that, Anne? Sorry.
Yeah, you go ahead. I think if we can, I mean, it may be that we may not have data on grammar schools versus non-grammar schools, but
as Anne says, our study didn't set out to sort of compare post-primary schools, be those grammar or otherwise. I think what I would say is that I would hypothesize that it's not necessarily a grammar school problem per se. I think it's across the education sector. And you very much highlight there about that sense of how do you prepare for the future when can be an over-reliance on quite traditional career pathways. Another point that I think is important to pick up on is the sense that young people who then complete A levels and have the view towards higher education, it may be that many young people who don't, well, we know from research, who don't receive the grades that they want, go on to do higher education in Great Britain or elsewhere. And there's a key point there, I would believe, whereby further education with better development and networks and links with schools could really pick up many of those young people and offer them viable options to higher education elsewhere.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, I'm not hearing you at the minute. I don't know if others are.
Sorry, I apologise. I was on mute there. Sorry. Just in terms of careers advice in school, I have a son who recently came through the education system, maybe in his early 20s now. But my view was that they didn't get very extensive careers advice in that particular school. And I'm just using one, so obviously it doesn't, I'm not suggesting it's the same right across the board. But careers teachers seem to be just teachers who taught another subject and had as a sort of added responsibility giving out careers advice. And I mean, I presume they received some sort of training, but I just felt that the training from the careers guidance teachers wasn't sufficiently extensive, and they didn't have sufficient knowledge about particular career pathways so that they could, give sufficient advice to pupils. What would your view be on that?
That's something that's certainly come up in our research, and it's very much a structural issue whereby schools can use that budget to, some schools will employ a dedicated careers teacher or in fact a careers department, whereas other schools, the teacher, and I would say it was more common that teachers had multiple responsibilities and did careers teaching as part of those responsibilities. I think it's a huge issue. It's an issue where I would want to be cautious around criticism. It's not criticising the teachers who are doing that, but one has to wonder the capacity of one individual to provide such an extensive range of careers advice whilst also holding down other responsibilities within the education system. I guess all young people have access to the Careers Advice Northern Ireland, which sits separate to school, and they come into school so they can access that. What we would like to see from our research is more dedicated time and resources to careers advice within school. Certainly there was a very consistent message with the careers teachers that we interviewed and who completed our survey around a lack of resources, be that time and money, to dedicate to really high quality careers advice.
I think just to add to that, there was a clear sense in the research that young people wanted more than just a one-off careers interview, that they wanted, as Ben said, advice that was more available to them in an ongoing sense, and indeed starting at an earlier stage of their journey through school as well. I think one significant stat in our report is 70% of careers teachers said they had insufficient time to keep up to date with skills in demand and labour market information. So again, this is not a criticism of careers teachers, but they're saying they just don't have the capacity, the time in their jobs to know where are the growth sectors in the economy and what should they be steering young people towards. So there's certainly some kind of a capacity and knowledge issue there about what information careers teachers have.
Yeah, thanks for that. And it seems there is a need to build capacity into the system somewhere, and that there are dedicated careers teachers who are able to keep up the speed with new information in the economy and so on, and in the jobs market. But thanks for that. I'm going to pass on to Diane. Diane, do you wish to ask some questions?
I do indeed, Pat. The committee will be well aware that this is an area that I raise on a very frequent and regular basis. The report that you talk about, Ben, is a really interesting but valuable snapshot of what young people think about how we're doing around careers advice. I think it's a really complex area with very many things that feed into it that have gotten us to where we are today. And going back to some remarks that Pat made, I mean, I think that fundamentally we have conditioned young people to think that the best route for them and for their prospects is to go to university and get a degree, any degree.
Yeah.
Even though that degree at a university may well cost them a huge amount of money, which they will be paying for a long time to come. And there are some stats that jump out at me as very worrying that you've just given us today, which I think that we should be concerned about. And like you, I'm not apportioning blame. I think this is a very complex problem, which we need to very carefully dissect and look at what the solutions might be on a number of different levels. So, I mean, it is really, really significant that only 31% of those young people thought that schools gave them information and knowledge about employability and lifetime skills. If education is about anything, it is about preparing the whole person for their lifetime ahead of them. And I think that is very, very significant. Only 20% of those young people found careers advice helpful. And 79% thought that careers advice could be improved. And again, this is not, I mean, some careers teachers that I know do careers part-time and have to manage a whole range of other responsibilities within the school. And the staggering statistic is that 69% of those young people knew little or nothing about growth areas within the economy. I mean, I just like your thoughts on that, because that is pretty staggering.
Yes, thank you for that feedback. And I would fully agree with you when you highlight the complexity of the issue, and for me, the interconnectedness of the issue, whereby if some young people, and again, to highlight, many careers advisors give excellent careers advice, but for some young people, they felt careers advice could be improved. And you can clearly see then that correlation between then young people who don't know about future growth areas and decline areas. And then the other statistic I would bring in there is parental knowledge and confidence of this issue. And I think when you bring those issues together, we have a very problematic snapshot of careers provision and employability. I do think there is this huge cultural issue within education in Northern Ireland, and of course beyond, whereby attainment is seen as the goal. You know, you get your 10 A's, you get at Gcses, you get your Ethos, you go to university. And as you say, Minister Dodds, that many young people will do a degree because they're almost socialised to that pathway, but whereby you go and do a degree, no matter what degree that is. And actually, there may be much more satisfying, both socially and economically, options available to young people. And we do hope to pick that up in our next research project, which is about retaining and regaining talent in higher education. But linked to your point there, I would agree. I think it's a combination of factors. It is very complex. I do think there are small steps and small solutions that may help. And we've made numerous recommendations, but one that jumps out for me is that we met with many employers and stakeholders who were really passionate about employing young people in local communities, often outside of big cities, in smaller towns. And they want much better relationships with schools. They want to provide work placements. They want to come in and give little sessions about why it's good to work in manufacturing, why it's good to work in textiles. But they find for some schools, the schools were possibly more focused on the assessment end. So I think there is a bit of work, and maybe a nimble bit of work there, whereby schools could possibly be a bit more open to local employers to work alongside careers advisors to boost interest in innovation in this area.
Well, I mean, I agree. I think that this is a really complex area of policy, but I think that there are some things that could be done. I've submitted a motion for debate to the Assembly on the issue of skills. So I think, first of all, we need to kind of bring together some of the stakeholders in this so that there is a more coherent response to the skills gaps within the economy and how we filter that down to schools. I think that there's some work that could be done about how we shape the curriculum. In other words, I mean, if 69% of those young people had no idea what the growth area in the Northern Ireland economy is, I mean, that is staggering, because the Northern Ireland economy is slowly but surely, transforming itself into this very high-level manufacturing economy, and a very high-level tech economy. And that's where the future skills and the future jobs in the economy are going to be. And it is very worrying that that is the situation. So I think we probably need to look at how we mainstream some of that into the curriculum, so that this is part of what young people do. When I was minister, not any longer, but when I was minister, I used to talk about the digital spine for Northern Ireland. In other words, that young people understood this and understood the language from a very, very early age. So, I mean, I do think that there's some things we can do there. What would you advise around that transition between school and FE?
I think, again, it's a complex policy issue. We find some really good pockets of good practice, particularly schools that had support from third sectors. So, for example, Princess Trust, whereby they worked with young people who were, I guess, on the edge of mainstream, both academically and socially, and they were doing some engagement programs with FE. In those schools, there were excellent relationships between the host school and the FE college. I guess I feel like some schools and young people, they need to see it to believe it. And we talk about manufacturing, digital skills, and I, of course, agree with all of those. But I think for some young people and possibly teachers, it feels a bit too abstract. And I think there's a piece of work there about how we make those options really tangible. Young people can look at them and think, oh, that's what that means. This course leads to that. This qualification is useful for this type of career. And I would see quite a large piece of work around engagement pieces around FE in schools. And recommendations we have made, for example, is trying to draw on a network of past pupils who have went to further education and been successful, and try and engage those back. They're really small, tangible steps. But what I know from working with young people is they need to see it to believe it. If you can't see it, it's just too abstract.
So is there a piece of work to be done between FE colleges and schools at, say, the age of 14, where there is greater access to the colleges and the provision? Is that a solution? Is that part of it? I mean, I'm thinking of, there's some of these are systemic, they'll take forever to work. Is there some quick wins that can help us along the way? Is that a solution?
Yes, I think that could be a quick win. That could be visit days, that could be visit afternoons. I also think there's an argument to embrace some of the rapid technological changes that happened during the pandemic. So it might be Skyping in, it might be doing little short videos of a day in the life of, or an afternoon in the life of somebody on a certain course or a certain profession. And many of the teachers we worked with were very keen to do that. I suppose I am often struck by the culture of some schools whereby employability can be seen as that's something you do when you finish your A-levels. It's not necessarily culturally seen as this is part of your whole person development.
It is an incredibly interesting piece of research. Can I just ask one last question? Of those 58% of parents and carers who knew nothing about apprenticeships, why do you think that is the case?
I would hypothesize that the landscape is really complex for some parents and carers. Certainly as a parent myself, you look at the options, and unless you have either a family member or you've read up a lot on it, it can feel really abstract. So if you think, just as an example, a level 2 qualification in advanced manufacturing, I just wonder what that means to many parents. Does that mean factory work? Does that mean IT work? It needs to be much more tangible. The other statistic, if we put that with that percentage, is that parents often felt very disengaged from careers advice. So some parents would tell us that their young person, their child, had careers advice on a Monday or whatever, and they didn't hear about it for weeks after. So it can happen in quite a vacuum of the young person's life. So we need more intervention points whereby parents can ask questions, parents can support young people, and that's particularly the case for young people with additional needs, or those young people who aren't on the sort of high-flying academic pathway. Parental involvement is, in my view, extremely important.
Did those young people see a difference between traditional careers advice in school and the independent careers advice service?
No, and in fact, many young people and teachers, some teachers were quite confused about the differentiation to it and would find it, particularly in the focus groups, wouldn't know who was related to what. I guess their teacher they knew from their school, but some young people would report they had limited to no engagement with the centralised careers advice.
Again, that's very worrying.
And linked to that, some young people hadn't done work experience, and teachers told us that wasn't necessarily a pandemic-related issue, but they had got too far on in the curriculum to do a work placement, or simply they were not enough placements to go on. And we see a real value of a centralised work placement hub, whereby young people get tasters or small flavours of experience rather than the traditional 2 weeks or a week, wherever that is, because we're preparing young people for a portfolio career that many young people, or indeed adults, will have, whereby they won't stick in one job for the rest of their life.
And I promised to my colleagues on the committee my last question. Did any of those young people have any knowledge of the higher level apprenticeship schemes?
Not to my knowledge, it wasn't discussed. Apprenticeships generally were seen quite vague. Do you know that the most concrete example people could have if they knew somebody in their local community who had done one, and in those instances they were what I would describe as the traditional apprenticeships, hairdressing, plumbing. There was no real understanding that that's really broadened out to a real diverse range of innovative apprenticeships.
Thank you. Really, really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane, and agree it has been very interesting research. Daniel needs to go early, so Daniel, have you some question you'd like to ask now?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm actually going to be nipping out, but I'll be back again in about 30 minutes. I have a thing to attend. This is a fascinating discussion, I have to say. It has me gripped, and I was trying to remember back the careers advice that I had received. People make up their own minds if it was good or bad. But in terms of the quality of it at school, I remember having so many questions and there wasn't enough answers, because at the same time as Diane and Pat has both said, there was often a teacher that was teaching a different subject and then would expect to do this on the side, almost to tick a box, if it can be as crude as that. I think it really needs to go way beyond this to ensure that younger people are well aware of the options that are available to them and the skills that are necessary and needed in order to fulfill the gaps in the market, if you like. So I'll start with this question. You tell us there's a need for real-world learning, better relationships between employers and schools, and creating a better ethos of life skills within education. Describe real-world learning and how it can be accredited to a young person as the first point, and how can better relationships be built between employers and schools?
Yeah, okay. So I guess the first point there about what is real world learning, 55% of our young people find work-based learning experiences to be the most helpful aspect of careers advice. So it's something they're really wanting. Practically, we've seen really good practices, examples whereby young people went along to local employers, be those factories or innovation labs in digital technology, and spent an afternoon or a day or longer. And they were just able to see, right, this is what this means. If you work in advanced manufacturing, this is the day in the life of type thing. And what we were particularly impressed at is that some employers then stayed in contact with the school or the class to let them know what opportunities were available and the best route if you wanted to do that job. So it felt like that if young people were able to actually do it, see it, and have little experiments in applying those skills, they were much more likely to be engaged and interested in it. For me, there's a possible missing puzzle piece there around involving parents and carers, because young people are very broad in their skills and abilities, but many young people might come home and not mention it for days on end or weeks on end. And if parents were engaged or given some information, they might be able to support the young person to take the steps towards that. What was your second point there? Sorry.
Just when you're on that, is there a way of accrediting it? To ensure that it's worthwhile or going well.
Some organisations do. So the Prince's Trust do some accredited placements. I would sort of be a bit cautious about this, because I wonder if we're going down to this, do things to get assessment, to be graded, to get a qualification. I see this more about real world learning, as part of the curriculum, because this, in our view, in the report's view, is as essential as obtaining your GCSEs and your A levels. Time must be made for this to be seen as really good practice.
Totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. And the other point that I wanted to add to that is, what do you mean by creating a better ethos of life skills within education, and how it can be created?
Yeah, definitely. Really good question. So I guess for us, the ethos idea is about, and it's a really long-term, probably very ambitious idea, creating a culture whereby skills, employability, problem solving, the things that we use in employment all the time, are central to the curriculum. They're in the Northern Ireland curriculum. Some schools tell us they use them. Some schools say it's an essential part of day-to-day, week-to-week teaching planning. That was less clear in other schools, and certainly for young people who were basically saying all of that stuff around problem solving, team working, we do that outside of school, and didn't see that as part of education, which I think is quite worrying. And I think it's very interesting that the young people that we worked with who were in sports clubs, who were in after school clubs, they had much more sense of why those skills were important. And whilst that's great that they're doing that after school, it is very important that we think about the centrality of that within the mainstream curriculum.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That is quite worrying. I would totally agree with that. Another question. You want to enhance the visibility of further education within post-primary education. Why does FE currently not have greater visibility presently? And do you think there could be a role for FE in primary education as well?
Yes, to both. Yes, there could be more visibility, and I think the primary area is something where many of these recommendations would apply. In terms of why I believe there's less visibility, I think it will broadly, there is a cultural issue within some, but not all, within some grammar schools, whereby the destination for young people is highly selective universities, often outside of Northern Ireland or within Northern Ireland. And FE just isn't on their radar. It's not something that they promote. It's not something they do in terms of having FE representatives attend. The other side of that is schools maybe who have less emphasis on academic attainment have excellent relationships. What we would like to see is a consistency or broadening out of that, whereby you don't run the risk of being a victim of a school that maybe is just focused on academic attainment, which is useful but not the be all and end all. What we would say is that the FE reps that we worked with were very keen to work with all schools and all sectors, but would say that some schools had somewhat of a closed door to engagement with the FE courses.
Yeah, and there's also a thing about the primary school element of it as well. When you dig into this from a very young age, children will tell you, "Oh, I want to be this when I'm older." And I think schools from quite a young age for a child should be encouraging children and reassuring them that they can actually be anything they want in life if they work hard enough to achieve that, regardless. And I think if that is happening from primary school level throughout, then we'll see considerable benefits as well, right throughout. Post-primary as well. Chair, if you bear with me, two more brief questions and then I'll leave you in peace. Careers education and guidance were significantly reformed after the 2013 inquiry. In your opinion, did the reformation bring any success? What areas remain to be improved? And how does your research using youth voices feed into this?
Okay, so there's lots of points there. In terms of Was it a success? It's difficult to say because, as I understand, it wasn't evaluated. So there were multiple recommendations, many of which were excellent and very tangible. To my knowledge, there's no published evaluation of that, which is difficult because we can't say from an evidence-based think tank perspective, this was a success, this wasn't a success. What we would see is anecdotally that some of the themes or ethos were implemented by some schools, particularly that idea about better relationships with employers, and more connection to varied work experience. Some of the more transformational aspects of that document, and indeed that huge piece of work, do not appear to have been implemented, certainly not on a consistent level.
Yeah. That's interesting as well. And that's why I suppose keeping a closer eye on this and ensuring that the system is improved is vital. And that's where it comes down. How do you measure this as you go ahead? How do you know the effectiveness of each school? And how do you know if one school's doing it better than the other? It's not entirely straightforward. This is an important question, and that'll be me, Chair. The Northern Ireland curriculum has not faced significant revision in well over a decade, which is a key contributor to this problem, to be honest. Does it reflect the knowledge, in your opinion, skills and transferable competencies required to equip our young people to live in a modern society?
I think there's two bits of that for me. There's the bit about the content and there's the bit about consistent implementation. One would wonder if a curriculum that was designed 10 years ago is fit for purpose. I have not explored it as part of this research, so I couldn't comment with any authority. What you would wonder is that there may be elements of that that could be updated, particularly around digital skills and wider transferable skills, problem solving, life skills that we've discussed. I think the big issue within our research and others is how consistent that is taught. It's a framework, and rightfully so. You could be in an area where there's 4 schools and you'd walk in and things like the world around us or will be taught differently, rightfully so. There is a concern that within this realm or this aspect of the curriculum that a lack of impact measures may mean that it's sort of kicked down the lane a bit and felt like we do that at the end of school, you do your week placement, you get your one-off appointment with the careers advisor, and that's it. So I guess I wouldn't be one to introduce measures for measures' sake, but you would wonder if there needs to be more scrutiny around the implementation of that aspect of the curriculum as well as potential revision.
I would agree, because, and this isn't me being critical of schools in particular, but you're right when you said earlier, quite a lot of schools are focused on ensuring that their kids get the best possible grades because it reflects well on the school. But there should be a wider conversation and more of a stronger focus on this and on the development for the real world, if you like. Just a final point to this. If you were asked how you would change the curriculum, I know you've said that you haven't researched this, but if you had an opportunity now, if the Minister for Education came to you now and said, what 3 recommendations would you make? What would they be?
It's like one of these game show questions. So 3 recommendations. Okay. I guess the first one for me would be around the implementation of a more rounded life skills program starting in primary school. I think that's essential for academic attainment. If we think that many of the young people, certainly when I think about my previous experience in youth offending, they don't understand that the skills that are really boring in school are essential. So English, maths and science, many young people, particularly young men, think, oh, we don't need those, I'm not interested in them. If within a primary school onwards format, they would be able to be brought to life so young people can understand the importance of those, I think that would be really useful. In terms of 2 or 3, I might have to pass over to Anne here in a minute, but another element for me would be the sense of what makes a good outcome, and the outcomes being much more broader within the curriculum. So the emphasis is less on assessment and more on acquisition and application. And by that I mean, so for example, numeracy, literacy, etc. There's less assessment of those skills and more assessment or understanding of the application of those in real life settings, be that in small groups with young people, be that within the employment market or within the education system. In my opinion, and indeed in multiple research projects, there's a lack of criticality within many curriculums, certainly not just in Northern Ireland, and we need to move away from teaching content to teaching higher order critical thinking skills. And it is concerning that many young people who enter higher education will then have to do that sort of training because it's been missing within post-primary. And I'm going to pass it to you.
If I could come on to the back of that before Anne comes in, what I've noticed, we have quite a lot of younger people come to us for work experience, and obviously as politicians we're engaging with younger people all the time. I have found a huge difference in generations of young people in that people my age, when we were going through school, we didn't have all these devices and computers and, well, they had computers, but not to the same extent. We didn't have them at our fingertips. And communication has changed. I have found that younger people find it a little bit more difficult to communicate face to face. And that potentially creates a considerable issue preparing that person for the world of work, if you like. In many aspects, I've just noticed that there's a real nervousness and an anxiety amongst some young people when it comes to face-to-face communication, which is going to be an issue when it comes to the world of work.
I think that's a really interesting point. I mean, we didn't look at that at all, but it is. I think that's potentially a very important generational issue coming through. I think just to go back to your question about the most important policy change, I think I'd follow up and echo what Ben finished on there about general skills for life and work. The more I go on in work and in life, the people who succeed are the people who have the transferable skills, who can communicate well, who can organise themselves, who can work with different people, who can solve problems, who have the digital skills. It's not the people who've got a GCSE in geography or French. It seems to me that we are really missing a huge set of life and work skills because we're so focused on exams, and actually we would do much better if we had a curriculum which, maybe it is teaching geography and French, but it's teaching it in ways that enables young people to develop the skills that they can then use in the workplace, because it seems at the minute we've got a very narrow academic focus. That's
a critical point you've made. Very good, yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you all. That's really helpful today. This has got my full attention. It's really good. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Is Robin still with us? Robin Newton?
Chair, yes, I'm here. I have an unstable network connection. I've been off and on 5 times, I think, now.
Okay.
But I can hear but can't see, so I missed the presentation by Ben. But can I thank Ben and Anne for coming this morning? I think the report is very interesting. I do know that I do think there is a need for our society to separate in the mind of parents mostly, I think, and indeed maybe younger people, the difference between further and higher education and the full potential of both a career pathway in further and a career pathway in higher education. In terms of vocational training overall, I think we do need to enhance the status of vocational training. Certainly the status of the engineer in society vis-a-vis the status of the solicitor or the doctor. And I think, our society needs to prioritise the status of folk in those fields. In terms of careers advice, remember being at schools as part of my employment and trying to enhance careers advice, the difficult task that is, because as others have mentioned, it is very much a role given to 1 or 2 teachers, depending on the size of the school. And the information is stored in the library and made available if the pupil wishes to seek it out. So I do welcome the report, and I think there's a foundation there worthy of being built upon. Just a few questions, Chair, and it's more seeking information. If I refer to page 20 in our pack and page 5 of the report, and it's the paragraphs titled "A Failure to Increase the Overall Baseline of Educational Achievement in Northern Ireland Will Leave Young People Vulnerable to Future Employment." Maybe you could just expand on that a little bit, and then the three areas of growth that you have highlighted. And then I was surprised to see the areas of decline that you've highlighted, because I would have thought global tourism, hospitality, arts and culture are indeed not areas of decline, but areas of future potential, post-pandemic, of course. So maybe you could make some comments around that paragraph.
Yeah, so just so I understand, I think we're talking about the first report.
Yeah.
Perfect, yeah. So going to the first point there, in terms of a failure to increase the overall baseline of educational attainment will lead to young people being vulnerable. What our desktop review there and other researchers find is that the amount of young people who educationally underachieve and don't attain the basic Gcse outcome, which we outline on page, I guess it's the free school. It's on page 3 there, if you want to turn to that, or people will be very familiar with it in the sense that those young people who are entitled to free school meals attain much lower than those who are not. That's what that point is related to, and a real concern about those young people being left behind, but also being more aspirational, that level 2 qualifications in and of themselves will not be sufficient for a future labour market, that due to automation, artificial intelligence and the fourth industrial revolution, very much linked to what Minister Dodds mentioned in terms of the digital spine, that young people will simply be left behind, and the baseline of educational underachievement that we have now could significantly rise. In terms of areas of growth and decline, that data is actually from the EPC and the Economic Policy Unit, and we're just reporting that. I hear what you're saying around hospitality, arts and culture and tourism. I wonder if those decline areas are in the context of the pandemic. And I wonder if your point also raises a really good issue around how do you keep data live, because whilst at the time of that report they were in decline then, it may be in 3 months' time, 4 months' time, certainly in the future they hopefully won't be, and it presents a key challenge to careers teachers, young people and parents.
Okay, thank you for that. And in terms of again, if I turn to page 23 of your report, and that's the first report as well. And it just, the investment in high quality post-16 skills. Have you any idea how Northern Ireland, in terms of investment in post-16 skills, matches up against any other nation, or particularly within the UK?
I don't have the data to hand. What that statement refers to is we've done some work exploring the Scottish system and the significant economic investment that had been placed in education and skills, and enhanced linking up with this skills strategy with economic policy. But I don't know how it compares. It's actually on that page, sorry, there around the SDS, the Skills Development Scotland service.
So we don't know whether Northern Ireland is in a good position or a less good position to other parts of, either Europe or indeed in UK?
Certainly per person, I don't have the data available to say that Northern Ireland is contributing more or less in terms of skill development in young people at that age group. I don't know, Anne, if there's anything you want to add to that.
I think we don't have the specific data, certainly in this research. I mean, I think obviously we can point to the general point about Northern Ireland skill levels being lower than the UK average, certainly, and there being issues about a predominance of people with few or no qualifications, and the concerns that we have highlighted in this report that people in that situation with few or no qualifications and very low levels of skills will struggle in future labour markets when there's greater automation and so on, as Ben mentioned.
Would you agree with me? And the paragraph is headed up investment in high quality post-16 skills. Would you agree with me that there is a need, and I made the point to the finance minister in the chamber yesterday, where the Assembly is offering in the civil service a number of apprenticeships. Now they're a small number vis-a-vis the size of the labour force in the civil service, but indeed that there is a need for us to address the two areas. And I'm accepting your report in terms of the high quality end post 16, but also a need to address entry levels into that may not be based on academic qualifications, but to find a pathway into further education or indeed into employment where young people haven't been able to provide their academic record to do so.
I think on that there's a definite need in the current system to offer better support to young people who aren't achieving in the way that they're not achieving the standard of 5 GCSEs and people who have fallen behind and so on. So there's a definite need to look at the particular circumstances of those young people and try and understand why they're not achieving. And we highlight in both our reports how you need to look at the wider issues that are going on in that young person's life to see what's holding them back. Is it a family issue? Is it a housing issue? Is it some kind of a health issue that they are struggling with, and to offer them more rounded, holistic support to enable them to get back on track and achieve those basic level of qualifications.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, a dual approach, I think, is how I would describe it, and I think that's interesting. Okay, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And Robbie Butler. Robbie, are you there? Would you like to ask some questions?
I would indeed, Chair. Thank you so much. Thank you, Anne and Ben, a chance to meet up again. Genuinely just want to echo the points made by some of the other members, and thank you for the report. It's very timely, and there is a passion within the committee here, and we have spoken at times about these issues. Your report is very welcome. I think one of the first things I'd like to look at, and I think, Ben, you possibly started to talk about it in your line of question with Daniel, and this was, I think traditionally we have kind of discussed the academic route and the vocational route as if they're two separate entities, and that we say it's either or. But from my perspective, I'm thinking, and you started to hint at it, that it's not either or. I mean, it could and should be a very much a blended approach. Can you expand a little bit more on that, either of you guys, please?
Yeah, definitely. This sense, I guess, that, as you say, can be quite binary. It's either or, and we find some really good examples in Switzerland whereby there is equal weight to the work-based learning alongside vocational learning, and there is a societal status related to that. It's called the dual TVET. The details are in the report. But what I think is really interesting about that approach and other approaches is that the policy is specifically aiming to give that equal status and remove the binary issue of you do one or the other. Now, I know some of the thinking behind the T levels as well in England was thinking that the technical training levels would remove the sense that vocational learning is for non-academic people. So that's another policy innovation that may be worth considering in our context. I do think it would require something quite structural to help young people and their parents see that it's not one or the other. And you could argue as well that the binary issue is quite dated. I'm thinking about discussions Anne's had here and I've had with other members that in the world of work, it doesn't really matter, in my view, if you've got a doctorate or 10 GCSEs. If you can't work with people, if you can't problem solve, if you can't manage a challenge, all of that's going to be extremely problematic. So you might wonder if there needs to be this general move towards less binary qualifications in general.
Can I just add some testimony to that? I think it's really important, and I've kind of railed against this in my former employment. I had 16 very successful years in the fire service. It wasn't something that I aspired to be, but I just ended up with. When I joined and applied, I think in late 1999, and was successful in February 2000, you didn't need a GCSEs. I didn't have and still don't have any GCSEs. But they added the entry requirement for GCSEs for a job, which is actually very, it's more vocational actually than academic, and there's a barrier there. I think an unnecessary barrier at times, and I think even employers like that, you know, in the sort of the statutory sector and so on, you could do a lot more. I mean, what was your engagement like, you know, with the civil service, with agencies like the police or the fire service, in terms of their input, in terms of what they think would be a good pathway for young people to careers there?
Yeah, just link to that. I think it's a really important point there, the sense that the recognition of alternative qualifications to GCSEs, that many employers that we worked with were quite confused about the range of options. We were really impressed with the work that the Prince's Trust do to engage with young people who aren't on the pathway for traditional GCSE acquisition and do alternative vocational-based and, I guess, life skill-based qualifications. What I would see is that the standardisation of GCSEs as a norm is problematic, because many young people will struggle to attain those, and those that do, as you say, that it doesn't mean that it's a reflection of their ability to do the role. In terms of the civil service, we met with, I guess, the project leads for the Department of Education and DFE on this topic. Unfortunately, nobody from the police or the fire service took part. They were invited to, but unfortunately did not take part.
No problem. I think that's something. I don't know if you have a position on this and whether this has been absolutely proven to be fact, but there is a cultural change. So previously, certainly in my generation, it wouldn't have been unusual for someone to leave school, get a job, and stay in that job for 30 or 40 years, or maybe have two jobs, possibly three. Is there any evidence to suggest that young people who leave school in the past 10 years have multiple jobs, go into multiple different arenas? And if that is the case, and I'm not suggesting it absolutely is, but I think anecdotally it might be, are we looking at promoting lifelong learning as well and starting that message? Are you suggesting we start that message either in post-primary and making young people more aware that whilst you may be focused and channeled in one way, that doesn't necessarily have to be it. Now, and I'm going to ask you this too, is that necessarily a good thing? We have this flux in the workforce, and then we become multi-skilled as opposed to being specialised in certain areas?
Yeah, so I guess that there's multiple points there. The bit that I can definitely comment on from a data perspective is that we've done some research within higher education and looking at leavers with a degree and their work pattern, and many think tanks have. And as you say, it would be very common for people to have multiple jobs, geographically move quite a bit, and that would be the norm, if you like. There's an issue there, I think quite a complex issue around, is that choice, is that good sort of practice to learn your skills, work across different sectors, or for some young adults, is that a reflection of a volatile labour market and poor working conditions, whereby people are moving from one temporary contract to the next? There's insufficient data to say that. there is other research outside of our own that I'm aware of that transferable skills are what's the word, lead to better outcomes in terms of employment. And I know Anne mentioned this, that you can have somebody with classic training in X or Y, but if they don't have the ability to be fluid with those skills, it's problematic. I would certainly see in my experiences in higher education that many graduates require support to do that at that stage. So it's sort of the 22, 23-year-old age. And one might wonder if more time and focus was put into that at primary school and post-primary, you would be working upstream rather than trying to correct an issue, particularly for young people who have went through a very academic route. Many young people may never have had a part-time job, maybe didn't do team sports because the focus was on academic attainment.
Guys, and I genuinely, my apologies for asking this question, okay? It's genuinely not a political question. I don't want you to answer politically. But the reality is that we've had political instability for a number of decades here. And that has led to probably a dilution of opportunity. So, for instance, we might not have had the businesses invest here in this past number of decades, and the Brexit protocol has obviously thrown up another potential spanner in the works in terms of opportunity for keeping our young people here and giving them the opportunities. Was this picked up in the studies at all? So, you look at when you're comparing to either the mainland or whether it's the Republic of Ireland in terms of opportunities for young people and pay rates, for instance. Very often we come down at the lower end of the scale, unfortunately. How important is it that we have political stability to ensure that those outcomes and opportunities for young people are here in Northern Ireland?
I guess what was present in this study and other work that we've done as a think tank is that one of the casualties of instability or a lot of change is that there's a failure to systematically implement evidence-based policy and evaluate it. So thinking about this project, it was previously discussed, the large piece of work that was done on careers advice and working with multiple stakeholders, a really good piece of work. And unfortunately, due to government change and instability, it's difficult to know how successful that was, how it was implemented, and change in government priorities. There's also this huge piece of work linked to this study around higher education and student places. Previous ministers done really good work on consultation documents, the big conversation in 2015 on the sustainability of higher education. Unfortunately, nothing was taken forward on that due to changes in government. So it's certainly not a criticism of government, but the fact is that the lack of stability leads to difficulties in implementing policies and possibly could lead to the creation of lots of strategies that are then never implemented due to change. I don't know to come in on that.
Yeah, just I think I would really echo what Ben said. I think our observation as a public policy think tank that takes a lot of interest in how government functions in Northern Ireland, our observation would be that there's a lot of strategies and policies written, but there is not a focus on ensuring they're delivered. And I think that is a very, very important feature to note about how government works in Northern Ireland. So there's years of economic strategies, skills strategies, education strategies, but there's a tendency to publish a strategy and then not follow up what actually happens and does it bring about the change. And Ben highlighted there a couple of examples that we've come across where there's no evaluation of a really very big scale policy document, or indeed there's a big scale consultation like the big conversation about higher education that happened in 2015, really open conversation about higher education funding and government funding from tuition fees and so on. A very good piece of work, but then it didn't go anywhere. So I would say there is a big issue for government about the how effectively it follows through on policy and strategy commitments.
Thank you. Final question, Chair. Thank you for your indulgence here. So this committee has a passion for our children with special education needs. And those pathways in any society will be measured and should be measured on how it treats those people perhaps who need the most assistance. Was there any detail picked up in this study, or is it something that might be looked at again with regard to the pathways for those who do require probably lifelong additional assistance, as opposed to those with maybe slightly more moderate difficulties, but maybe more severe difficulties? I know there's some great projects out there, and you've got people like Stepping Stones in Lisburn and so on, and different projects which are excellent, but we've still got many young people maybe who are not realising their full potential.
Yeah.
Was this picked up?
Yes, there's two issues that jump out for me here. There's the very much as you indicate, the post-16 provision is very inconsistent, and many schools that we spoke with and parents would highlight a real anxiety from sort of 12, 13 years old onwards about what's going to happen with these young people. What are their training opportunities and choices? The second thing that we find, and very much linked to wider research as a result of the pandemic and the evolving high street, are the jobs and roles for people with additional needs are disappearing. The sort of traditional retail roles or other agencies that employ people with additional needs are in decline, and there needs to be urgent consideration about how people with additional needs have fulfilling lives. I see a huge role in automation and artificial intelligence for people with additional needs and advanced manufacturing. With more support and training, many people with additional needs could be involved in those sectors. We need to be much more aspirational for our children with additional needs than confine them to a lifetime of day hospitals or activity centres with no real focus.
I'd really appreciate that. Ben, just if you've got any reports or anything you can maybe direct us towards, it's interesting, talking about AI and automation. If there's anything at all, even in terms of a link or something, please share it with the committee. We'd be really grateful. And thank you for your indulgence. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robbie. Nicola, would you like to ask some questions, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thanks, Anne and Ben, for your presentation and for the research. Really, really interesting. I'm glad we've had the opportunity to discuss it here this morning. I'll get stuck into the questions straight away. I'd kind of like to know your viewpoint on the Department of Education and how effective they've been in preparing young people for the world of work. And I suppose, what areas do you see as requiring greater investment, maybe, I think as we mentioned already, digital skills, and maybe even on STEM subjects? So do you see those areas as requiring further or greater investment?
I think stepping back from that, there's this bigger issue about how do we make employability, life skills and careers more tangible and effective across subjects, because whilst those areas that you mentioned are areas of growth, we have to think about consistency here. What we have found is programs like Science Stars, which promote STEM, particularly involving young women, which is great. But we need to think about consistency in Northern Ireland. There needs to be a consistent approach to upping the overall standard of careers, employability and life skills across education. I would see that as a major priority for the Department for Education. And I know from working with the project leads, they're really keen to develop much more consistency in that and centralised approaches to work experience. If we think about our research, young people are telling us they want to know more, they want work-based learning, but not enough young people get that opportunity. So I think that is a real starting point. Those areas you mentioned are very important, but I do think there's a temptation in Northern Ireland that we go down these silos of specific areas and we ignore the bigger picture of achievement and well-being.
Grand, Ben, I think that's fair enough, and I'll come back to that point in a minute, but I would just like to know how effective you think the department has been so far in helping prepare young people into the world of work.
Sure, I think it's a really big question. I think it would be naive of me, based on our research, to evaluate the whole department's effectiveness. What we would say is that there is a larger issue here about the implementation and evaluation of policies and strategies that are developed. So whilst it's great that there has been revised attention to educational underattainment in Northern Ireland, with huge investment and resource into those areas, and the findings are really interesting and very relevant, it's essential that learning is then applied and evaluated, because otherwise we might be tempted to get into a cycle of another another strategy. I'm particularly conscious of the future work on Education. The name has totally escaped me. That's going to explore higher education and 14 to 19s, the independent review of education. There is a concern, of course, that those recommendations will not be put in place possibly to nearly 2030 or in and around then. In the meantime, there are short steps that we have outlined in our report that we are confident that could make some real evidence change within education.
I think just to add to that, if you, for an overall assessment, how well are we preparing young people in Northern Ireland? I suppose the one thing I would point to, and which I think anybody in education, or anybody who looks at education would point to, would be the attainment gap, which Ben mentioned, between young people who are entitled to free school meals and those who aren't, and the fact that educational outcomes are so influenced by socioeconomic background, and this has been an issue for Northern Ireland for many years, and there have been many strategies written about it, including a new one just recently, a couple of months ago. And I think the focus on that issue is absolutely welcome, but I would say that issue is a real example of where there's been a lot of policy analysis and a lot of thinking and documents published, but a lack of concentrated focus on ensuring delivery of change. And so, there has just recently, I think in June, been a new report from an expert panel about narrowing the gap in educational attainment. And we must have this time a sustained focus on making sure change is brought about and outcomes are improved, rather than coming back to this issue in 5 years and saying, let's do another review.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you there. There's no point in just keeping talking about the same topics. We need to see change, so I'm sure we'd all agree with you in that there. In fact, I just want to bring it back to the specifics of STEM subjects, and historically, the uptake with female population would have been considerably lower. So can you tell me what we could do at a policy level to increase the level of uptake of those subjects with female population? What do you think?
I think there's some really good initiatives already, like the science stars that I mentioned that aims to engage young people and young women in STEM subjects. I think practically there's something about how do we help young women and young people understand STEM. I think we use STEM really flippantly as adults. We talk about it, we understand it. For young people, particularly if you think about young people who maybe are from a background who don't have family in STEM or anybody they know, it needs to be much more tangible, it needs to be understandable, and it needs to be much more aspirational. Linking to our report, that's where we see a real role for careers advice to be much more innovative. I also see there's a huge issue in STEM that when we traditionally talk about STEM, we think about the higher qualification levels. So we sort of think the degree, the master's, the doctorate, but actually there are many STEM roles at level 2 and above. And we think we need to we can't forget those young people, because otherwise there's a temptation that we reinforce a class divide whereby those who are not on free school meals continue to get support in those careers, but those who are, and using that as a crude measure obviously of economic capacity, but there needs to be more emphasis on the other skills and roles that can be done that aren't at degree level in STEM.
Yeah, I think they're really important points, Ben, and I suppose you're right, it's right back to careers advice and I suppose the lack of it there. I just finally want to touch on another point. You've already discussed this in some detail with Robbie, but about kind of specific interventions that are available for children with additional needs, so whether it be like special educational needs or the likes of children, like looked after children. I know you mentioned there about artificial intelligence and automation, like was other things you said, maybe be routes for younger people with special educational needs and that to go down. But can you give me any greater detail on considerations you've made and how we can actually help them, or how schools can help them?
Yeah, I guess there's two issues for me here. There are ways that young people can be helped, but the other issue that we need to acknowledge is that many young people will be undiagnosed with special educational needs due to the significant complexities and delays in the SEN system. So you might wonder that we're talking about the tip of the iceberg of the young people who we spoke with, but also in available statistics, because those who are not diagnosed and go through the SEN route won't be counted. So I would wonder if the atypical learner with additional needs is much more common than we think, and that being on a spectrum from young people maybe with dyspraxia, dyslexia, right up to those with quite complex social, emotional and cognitive needs. In terms of how we involve them, I think this is about the young people who are identified as vulnerable or with additional needs. They receive much more targeted support. And again, there is work done here about the mentoring issue here, that young adults who have been successful in obtaining employment or skills with additional needs can be fantastic mentors to those young people with additional needs. I've said this before and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but young people need to see it to believe it. If you're a young lady in Fleming Fulton and you're thinking, well, what am I going to do in my life? If you meet somebody who's maybe been really successful or is having a good life, success not being measured through employment, but having a good life, and you are able to reach out with other young people, I think that is an excellent first step. And we do highlight the role for mentors within this process.
That sounds fantastic, actually, Ben, a real kind of positive approach to it to show exactly how successful they can be. That's really, really positive. Thank you for that there. That's everything from me, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. And Justin, you're next in line.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Anne. Folks, what a wonderful presentation. What a wonderful evidence session here. The line of questioning has been brilliant. The information is fantastic. Your own careers, you've gone into work for a think tank. Tell us the story of how you landed there with your education, your career training. Did they expose you to the possibility of working for a think tank, or how did that happen?
Okay, yeah, I hadn't prepared for this. My personal experience, I'm very proud of. I came from a large working class estate, grew up in a high rise, did GCSEs in a school that didn't do A-levels, and did my A-levels in Belfast Tech. And after I did my A-levels, I went on to work. I went on to do a degree, worked with young people with mental health problems, and was involved in multiple policy projects in Northern Ireland before doing a doctorate in psychology. And since then, I've worked as a clinical lead in youth offending, in policy projects in the NHS. And just before I worked in the think tank, I worked in Queen's in the graduate school. Think tanks offer people the opportunity to contribute their voice and evidence to change. And that's certainly something that what attracted me to working in a think tank. There is a lack or a paucity of critical evidence in Northern Ireland for change. And we believe we can really move that argument forward.
Brilliant.
So, I had a more, I suppose, what might be seen as a more traditional, conventional route. So I grew up in Belfast, went away to university in England, studied economics. And after that, I went into the civil service in London through the fast stream and spent 15 years working in different government departments. So I worked in the Treasury for 10 years and in the Cabinet Office and in the Home Office. Then I returned to Northern Ireland. I was the head of the Electoral Commission for 5 years. So for all of you on this call, you'll have filled in Electoral Commission financial returns around elections, and you probably hated us, to be honest. So I did that for 5 years, and then the opportunity came up at Pivotal, and I've always been really passionate about public policy. I've never been political at all, but I have a real passion for using evidence to try and improve policy. And so the role at Pivotal was just something that I would really jumped at and thought would be a great opportunity to try and have make a positive difference in Northern Ireland.
Okay, thanks, Anne. Well, I asked that for two reasons. Number one, I'm genuinely interested in your journey. But number two, there was no career class, no mention in the careers for becoming part of a think tank. I don't think there's anybody in the careers class now. How about pursuing potentially becoming part of a think tank? That's not there in terms of the opportunities being presented, I'm sure, to young people. And that's why I'm asking what's the best strategy to allow children and young people to be able to think outside the box in terms of the potential of their future careers, which may not potentially exist right now. So that's why I asked. I think that sort of blue sky thinking needs to be embellished in our education system to help children see that those possibilities may be there in the future. And work experience and placements, which have been discussed already, are a huge part of that. And how can work experience and placements not just be a 1 week block as part of a child's education? How that can be plugged in at different stages along the process to allow kids to get out and see what the industry is doing, see what the possibilities are, and to broaden their minds more widely.
We think there are some barriers to that many employers, if not all employers we met, were really passionate about working with local schools and communities to encourage young people to work in their sector, or just broadly to give them some sort of experience. What many employers told us that some of the barriers there were that the timing of the curriculum was quite difficult to work around, whereby young people had academic requirements and classes to attend, and that they were a real blockage. There's also been changes to the way work experience is organised, and they were some barriers too in terms of the paperwork for small businesses to complete was very off-putting, and working counter against that will to involve young people. But go back to your point, I think it's a very important point, that criticality and what I would describe as meta-thinking, thinking and thinking about processes, is done in some schools, but it's not consistently done. And I think it's really interesting that there's so much emphasis put on it for degree level students, when really if that work was done much earlier, there would be less need for it in degree level students.
When I was in sixth form, my mates, Paul McCaver from Killian, Rory O'Neill from Dublin Road, decided to go on a work experience to Shorts Aircraft Factory in Belfast. And what an experience that was, what an education it was, for two reasons. On our last night, there was a bomb went off in Shaftesbury Square, Blue Shaftesbury Square, the bits area went off a bomb, and we were in the Shorts the next morning, and they thought the South Armagh boys had been to Belfast to do a job. So that was an education. In terms of the soft skills and sports participation, I don't see sports mentioned in your report, and maybe forgive me if I missed that. What is the importance and relevance of sport in developing children to enhance their education, to broaden their education capacity and capabilities, and to develop their soft skills? And in the soft skills, I talk about problem solving, innovation, teamwork, leadership, resilience, mental toughness, entrepreneurship. How is sport used and utilised in the terms of our education system currently, and how potentially can it be used and utilised in those regards going forward?
Sure. We didn't look at sport as a standalone factor, but what we did look at is part-time employment, youth clubs and out-of-school activities. Young people consistently told us that they were a very positive experience for them. So be that football clubs, GAA, hockey, whatever sport young people were interested in. What we find is that was particularly important for young people who didn't feel connected to academic attainment, whereby they were able to get a sense of feeling good about themselves, being part of a team, being part of something, being part of an organisation is extremely important for overall well-being and a sense of self.
But in terms of the education, you feel that it hasn't properly been explored. What would you say, Ben, in terms of the potential for sport to be utilised much more strategically as a learning tool for kids and young people?
So, certainly it wasn't part of our project, but what I know from wider research is that sport has multiple benefits, both psychologically, physically and emotionally. What you would wonder is one of the issues possibly we may have in Northern Ireland is that sport can be quite binary. You sort of engage in traditional sport, and for young people who aren't very sporty or don't have the ability to engage in quite complex team sports, it would be good to have a wider range of options and out-of-school or in-school activities.
Can I just add something to that? And this isn't in our report, but seeing you raised it, Justin, I think it's really interesting that I think we have a focus here on achieving at a high level in sport rather than participating. Or maybe actually we encourage participation up to a certain age, maybe 11 or 12. And then, there's less of an emphasis on winning and it's all about taking part. And teamwork and exercise and healthy lifestyles and all of that. But then we move into sport being very much about being, achieving at a high level and being in a winning team. And I think there's a real policy issue here, actually, and we haven't done any work on this at all, and we'd love to, I think, but there's a real issue here about how do we encourage young people to still participate for the wider benefits in terms of healthy lifestyle and in terms of team working and problem solving and all those things. How do we encourage participation for those who are not attaining at the highest level?
Okay, I feel very strongly about this, and a fundamental fact is if you're having fun, if children and young people are having fun, they're winning, and they all need to have access and be regularly participating in a team environment because it develops them so positively as people, and I feel very strongly about that. I think that's a piece of research maybe you could look into in terms of your think tank. And I want to just touch on what Nicola mentioned already. I think others mentioned the SEND aspect of education and how they are given and encouraged and empowered to reach their full potential, whether that be academically, whether that be vocationally, or as a blended style. I think it's really incumbent on us as a society to provide those avenues of opportunity for children with special educational needs.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that, and linked to the points I'd said earlier. I think it's important when we think about children with additional needs that many children with additional needs leave our education system undiagnosed, unsupported, and on a pathway of a lot of insecurity. What we know is based on the young people who are diagnosed, their outcomes are much poorer than those who do not have a diagnosis. And much more emphasis needs to be based on how we engage those young people in careers for the future and moving away from traditional careers. What we find is that teachers in special educational needs are very busy. They're managing multiple systems, very complex young people, and supporting their families, and arguably would require additional support to have that focus on careers, given, I guess, the adaptation that some people with complex needs would need for the labour market. I know there are many social enterprises in Northern Ireland that do excellent work with people with autism and learning disabilities, and hopefully we see a further growth of that and a focus on earlier intervention with young people to inspire them for the future.
Okay, Ben, and Anne, listen, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Justin. And last but not least, Harry. And then I think Robin wants in for a short question after yourself, Harry.
And thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Ron and Dr. Ben. I think some excellent points talked about there. It's great that this is indeed on the radar at the minute, and going forward, making important life choices. The report highlights that young people need to be willing to engage with training programs if they are to be of any benefit. There are some young people whom a gentle nudge in the right direction could be enough. What would your view be on the concept of a compulsory work placement scheme for young people who have not been in education, employment or training category for a prolonged period? Something that would provide them with a wage and allow them to experience a workplace, giving them a stepping stone to build a CV. There were some good schemes in the past for this. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. Thank you.
I think my initial thoughts are around any compulsory action can be quite difficult for young people psychologically and emotionally. It can raise people's defence barriers. I have extensive experience of working in youth offending, whereby young people were put on court orders to complete work experience and reparation. And in my experience, those young people who were mandated to do that often resist the system. I do hear what you're saying, though. I think that particularly if it's paid, there is a sense that maybe I'm less sure about compulsory, but more about, strongly encouraged, or it's really embedded in the curriculum, and there's a wide range of young people or a wide range of options for young people to engage in. Young people, as we know, who are NEET or not in education or employment or training, are possibly one of the most marginalised groups in society, and will have very poor outcomes. we worked with really good initiatives like the Princess Trust, who are really actively working with this population to increase health outcomes, educational outcomes. What my learning from my previous career in this role would say is that needs to be done in a a collaborative way, because some young people who are not in education, employment or training or NEET have experienced extensive trauma, substance misuse, etc. And the compulsory element will make them kick back and just not engage. So it could be counterintuitive, but I do hear what you're saying, that I guess a sense of a broader range, more of an emphasis on it, and certainly paid, I think could be very encouraging.
Yep. Okay, thank you. And the report also highlights the importance of careers departments within post-primary schools and the need for work experience for students. Often the level of career support is dependent upon the individual school, and the time allocated for placements is limited. Is this something the department needs to address?
This is something we've raised with the project leads from DE and DFE, and I think we're on the same page there, that we need to develop more consistency. And one idea might be that there is a central hub of work experience options, but also enhanced careers advice. We're interested in the use of technology, so some sort of online hub whereby young people can access short bites of information, a bit like almost an Instagram story, very, very short pieces, short attention spans, short information, but to engage young people and move beyond necessarily traditional one-to-one work, although that's still very important. So we would be hopeful that some of the recommendations that we have made will be considered by the larger transition project done between DE and DFE.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your answers, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Harry. And Robin, you wanted in for a short question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wonder, within the executive summary, your second report, it indicates that the report argues that transformational change is needed in the education and skills systems for 14 to 19-year-olds. I think there's a general agreement across the committee today that something does need to be done. But I wonder, and Harry there referred to the NEETs sector. Now, those who opt out of education at 16, then take their advice from the Jobs and Benefits Office in terms of probably more just on where a job would be available rather than a career. But if we are going to holistically address this issue, do we not need to see a joined-up approach between our education and then on to Jobs and Benefits Office, where professional advice can be offered to those who are seeking employment at that stage?
Yes, I can certainly see your point. In our first report, we talk about the need for that joined up thinking between education and Department of Work and Pensions and companies that are commissioned to do work on their behalf. We particularly highlight in that first report that there needs to be a wider understanding of young people who are NEET, whereby the outcomes for employment-based placements are often quite poor, because those young people haven't been connected up to wider community issues, be that mental health, drug and alcohol issues, or basic issues like housing. We can't expect young people who are NEET to attend a work placement if they are sofa surfing, if their parent or main adult in their life is using drugs and can't really be there for them. So I think there are really wide systemic issues within the NEET population that need addressed. But I would agree with you that it's beyond education, thinking about wider DWP issues.
Okay, and forgive me, and I'm sure it's not within your remit, but do you see a way of getting that joined upness?
I think some of it is around trying to think about the whole person approach. And I know initiatives have been done in Manchester and Liverpool whereby the department have worked with local charities particularly for young people who are rough sleeping, to put that whole package of support in. So to think about housing, to think about basic life skills before you move up the hierarchy of employment. Because the reality, as I say, is that the expectation to get a young person into employment who has nowhere to live, not enough to eat, and no sort of consistency, it's totally unrealistic. So I've been really impressed with initiatives in the northwest of England that have done that sort of work, but that involves significant investment and cultural change.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
I think you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry, I'm having some technical issues there, sorry. I just wanted to ask one final question. An area that I don't think touched on was languages. And over recent times, we've seen a decrease in the number of young people here who are learning modern languages. I'm amazed when I go to the continent and speak to young people who speak 2, 3, and sometimes 4 languages. And Dublin is full of young people who work for the likes of Google and Facebook and companies like that, and who speak fluently 2, 3, and 4 languages. And if 2 people go for a job, and all things being equal, except one can speak 3 languages fluently, are we not at a severe disadvantage then if languages aren't incorporated in the new approach in terms of the economy and the jobs market?
Hold on. I think there was a bit of breaking up there, but I think if I've understood the summary of that was the idea, the role of languages in promoting better economic outcomes or more job variation. Is that correct? Sorry.
I'm sorry. There appears to be a problem here with my line. I'll say it again. I mean, I'm amazed at the number of young people on the continent who now speak 2, 3, sometimes 4 languages. And Dublin is full of young people from the continent like that who work for companies like Facebook and Google and so on. And yet here there has been a decrease in the number of young people learning languages. And if all things are equal, if 2 people go for a job, if all things are equal except one is fluent in 2 or 3 languages, are our young people not at a disadvantage in that respect? And should languages not have a more important position in the time ahead in terms of the job market and the economy? I hope you're able to pick that up okay.
I'll try and pick up the points that certainly were related to our research. Language study wasn't the focus of this study, but what we would say is that teachers talked about a very busy, content-heavy curriculum, and so some may say that the creation of more learning creates more difficulties in terms of assessment. I think there's a bigger issue here about the importance of learning languages and what learning languages does for young people's social, cognitive and emotional health. There's substantial evidence to say that learning languages creates better problem-solving skills in young people, enhances confidence, enhances memory acquisition and creative capacity and flexibility and thought. You mentioned the continent and within Europe, I can't speak for all European countries, but in many European countries, the acquisition of multiple languages occurs in primary school or nursery school. And so the increase of languages in Northern Ireland would strike me as something that would require very significant cultural change. And whilst that may be useful and interesting, it may be there are some precursors that are required in the curriculum and the curriculum delivery before that may occur, if at all.
Okay, thanks for that, Ben. And again, Anne and Ben, want to thank you very much for your very interesting and informative presentation and the answers to the questions here today. It's given, I'm sure it's given the committee a lot of food for thought. So again, thank you, and we hope to speak to you again sometime in the future.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for the invitation, and we do look forward to engaging with you again.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Great.
Could I ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove all the witnesses and add the members back into the spotlight, please? Thank you. We were moving fairly quickly at one stage. I think we're slightly behind now, Claire. So could I just ask you to summarise any actions or requests coming out of that session?
I will indeed, and I'll be brief because I can see that the witnesses for the next session have all arrived, Chair. Okay. That was really interesting, and it will feed into the briefing that the committee is going to have concurrently with the Economy Committee on 20th of October about the 14 to 19 strategy. Also, there are some issues that I think the committee might want to follow up on. Really just right into the Education Department and Economy about how they can improve the visibility of the career thread running through education and on to the workplace. This idea of do it, see it, reapply it, involve parents and kids. Seems to be key, and the fact that the curriculum scheduling is an impediment to that, is not really fit for purpose. The Pivotal recommended a centralised work experience hub to prepare young people for portfolio career, and again, that's something that could be used to highlight the visibility of apprenticeships. There seemed to be a really, really low awareness of the range and availability of these apprenticeship schemes. There was a message about a repeated failure to implement evidence-based change, which I think members can follow up when the review panel for the review of education comes to brief the committee. There's a huge responsibility, I guess, on the panel to deal with the like of this and to follow through on policy and strategy commitments in this area. Robbie asked for data on the development support throughout the career life of young people, and especially for those with special educational needs. And the presenters did say a couple of times quite starkly that really there's such an iceberg of undiagnosed pupils with special educational needs due to systemic delay that it's hard to develop programs for them, such as preparing them to use artificial intelligence, mentorships for people with special educational needs to illustrate the availability of those roles to them. So I think that really brings us to ask for an update briefing from the Education Authority on their reform process. The committee has provisionally asked for this and for an update on the business plan, which will underpin funding of the reform process. So I think we should accelerate that request. And then there were the attainment gap is so strongly predicated on socio-economic capacity that, again, I think we'll need to ask the department for an update briefing. But next week we have the Fair Start panel who will be talking about the attainment gap and how to address that. So there you are, Chair. Just a little bit of correspondence, and otherwise members can take up these issues again at briefings that are already scheduled in our forward work programme.
Okay. Any comments from members on any of that?
Chair, can I just ask, excellent summary by the clerk. I wonder just in the area of the Department for Communities and the advice offered to young people, 16-year-olds. Could we just get some indication from the department about what their role in that is? And Ben referred to 2 reports that had been done in, one was Manchester, I can't quite remember where the other one, trying to address the problems of those young people who were regarded as NEETs, and indicated that some investment had been made there. If we could get copies of those reports, that might be useful, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Robin.
Certainly, Robin. Everyone agreed on that? Agreed, yes.
Agreed.
Okay. We move on then to our next presentation. It's an oral briefing by the bill sponsor on the, on the autism bill. The autism, I'll ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove all members first and add the witnesses. And I refer members to the Autism Amendment Bill as introduced at page 127. Autism Amendment Bill Explanatory and Financial Memorandum at page 139. A briefing paper from Autism NI on education, skills and training for young people aged 14 to 19 years old, page 143. A response from the Minister of Education to the committee's letter supporting mandatory autism training for teachers on page 148, and a call for evidence from the Committee for Health on the Autism Bill at page 152. I'd like to welcome our guests today. With us are our good friend Pam Cameron, MLA, who's the bill sponsor, Miss Kerry Boyd, Chief Executive Officer, Autism NI, Dr. Arlene Cassidy, and Kelly Maxwell. You'll have 10 minutes to make a presentation, and then the committee will ask some questions. So I presume it's yourself, Pam, kicking off.
Thank you, Chair. And Arlene, Dr. Cassidy was going to do a couple of minutes, and then I would proceed with the rest. It might take a little bit more than 10 minutes, if that's okay, just to outline the causes.
No bother. Okay, thanks. The floor is yours, Arlene.
Okay, well, thank you, Chair, members and clerk, for the opportunity. My name is Arlene Cassidy. Having worked as a social worker in East Belfast during the Troubles in the 70s, I moved to Barnardo's in 1980 to work with children with learning disabilities, and this is where my interest in autism began. In 92, I was employed to develop Northern Ireland's first autism charity, PAPA, later renamed Autism NI. I retired as CEO in 2017, and I'm currently acting as an advisor to Autism NI and supporting of its role as Secretariat to the All-Party Group on Autism. So my role today is to remind us all why we must resort to the Northern Ireland Assembly, yourselves, and legislative solutions. Why are we here again for autism? So let me set some context. In short, we discovered autism late in Northern Ireland and never really caught up. Until 1990, autism apparently didn't exist here, no diagnosis, no support, until Autism NI PAPA was set up. Yet services began in 62 in England, in 65 in America, and 63 in Ireland. In the early 1990s, parents travelled to England for autism assessments, and autism was classified here wrongly as a learning disability. The first funding for autism, statutory autism services, was in 2002 to diagnosis only, and by then Autism NI had lobbied every board and trust, and autism strategies were agreed, but then they were dropped as committed individuals moved on to other duties. The impact is still evident today because even by then it was already too late, too little too late, as waiting lists for assessment and diagnosis averaged then between 2 and 4 years, with autism data only available by a manual count. Research internationally reveals that the cost to society in human and monetary terms is greater through neglect than by actually doing something. The conclusions drawn from this dynamic crisis were that, firstly, there was a systemic reluctance and failure across government institutions to recognise, understand, resource and plan for autism services, and that secondly, the Northern Ireland Assembly and legislative change was needed. An all-party group on autism, APGA, was needed. The all-party group on autism has its origins in the Autism NI nomination of cross-party MLA autism ambassadors in 2001 and was formally constituted in 2008 following a Northern Ireland Assembly delegation to Capitol Hill to meet with the Autism Caucus there and agree a memorandum of understanding on autism with the US Congress. That delegation was accompanied by the Celtic Nations Autism Partnership, which was an amalgam of autism societies in Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland and Ireland, committed to helping each other lobby each of their political institutions. The result of all of this political activism was the Autism Act NI 2011, as a uniquely cross-party innovative legislation with the recognised catalyst being a parent-led Autism NI organised lobby seated in each constituency with no professional lobbyists. It was the first cross-departmental legislation here, predating the Children's Services Cooperation Act by 4 years. It introduced the annual publication of the first regional autism data collection. It remains the most comprehensive, lifelong, cross-departmental single disability equality legislation globally. It amended the DDA to recognise autism. It mandated an ambitious recurrent 7-year cross-departmental national strategy for autism. This law held so much promise. Job done? Unfortunately not. The all-party group has gathered clear and shameful evidence that those charged a decade ago with the implementation of the Autism Act have failed us all. It is true that the DDA change has increased the recognition of autism and that the annual collection of prevalence data is progressing in its sophistication and potential. However, the failures around implementation are many and avoidable. I refer you simply to the Broken Promises report published in 2016 by Autism NI and the National Autistic Society NI for the only independent commentary and evaluation of the Northern Ireland Autism Strategy for further detail. This report, which was launched by the all-party group 5 years ago, remains relevant, but obviously does not take account of the continued deterioration in services as the gap between autism prevalence and resource investment increases annually. According to the Department of Health data, Northern Ireland has the highest prevalence rates of autism in the world and has proportionately, therefore, the lowest investment in services. What is going on? We didn't really have to be here. It didn't have to be like this. So why are we here and what must we do? We have to address failures in implementation of legislation by setting down specific remedies. We have to address failures in leadership and ownership and motivation. We have to tackle duplication across departments and regional services, inject regional strategic consistency, address inequalities, address the continued legacy of investment neglect. And just how do we do this? And that's by strengthening the Autism Act through the Autism Amendment Bill 2021. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Arlene. Chair, if it's okay, I'm going to go ahead with my presentation.
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. Thank you.
And thank you for the time at the Education Committee this morning. It's very important. As many of you will already know, I'm the current chair of the All-Party Group on Autism and have been in that role since 2016. And I'm very proud to support the autism community within this capacity. So I, along with colleagues within the group, believe that there is a huge gap in service provision that needs to be urgently addressed. Therefore, with the full support of the All-Party Group on Autism, I've sponsored a private member's bill called the Autism Amendment Bill, which will strengthen the original Autism Act of 2011. As Dr. Cassidy has already explained, when the Autism Act was introduced, it amended the Disability Discrimination Act to recognise and protect the rights of people with autism. It was the first legislation passed by this Assembly that mandates cross-departmental service planning and delivery across adult and children's services. As a result of the Autism Act, the implementation of the autism strategy is a legal requirement. However, as we're all too well aware, the implementation has not happened in the speed or the way in which it was intended. And on numerous occasions, I've heard from various organisations, autistic people and their families, that there is little to no support for someone with a new diagnosis of autism. Even getting a diagnosis is extremely difficult, with many families waiting up to 2 years and adults waiting up to 4 years. However, this is only the start of the autism journey, and as I will explain today, there are many, many improvements that need to be made in order to support this very vulnerable community. Over the past number of years, the APG on autism has gathered evidence confirming the following points. Only one of the 3 action plans in the mandated NI Autism Strategy from 2013 to 2020 has been completed. The annual autism prevalence report produced by the Department of Health now reflects that we have the highest confirmed autism prevalence rate in the world, with 1 in 22 school-aged children having a diagnosis of autism. The NI Autism Strategy progress reports are extremely subjective, generic, and absent of any measurable outcomes or targets. No independent research or evaluation has been generated to assist discovery, planning, or delivery. A well-publicised plan by the Health and Social Care Board to initiate an independent study to explore the different rates of diagnosis across the 5 health and social care trusts hasn't been implemented. And assembly questions submitted by ABCA members confirm that the causes for diagnostic inconsistencies across trusts remain unknown. And we do have a letter from the Health Minister acknowledging that his department does not know why there are such inconsistencies from trust to trust areas. For example, why does it take up to 2 years for diagnosis in Belfast Trust, and yet the Southern Trust apparently takes 13 weeks? No government department has submitted any new bids for funding of autism services in the last 10 years. No new funding was attached to the Autism Act NI 2011 implementation. Indeed, the only published new recurrent funding injection was in 2016, when £2 million was allocated to health towards diagnosis only. The Department of Health maintains a medical rather than a social model of disability. This has created a serious funding imbalance for conditions such as autism, which require educational and social or community intervention. The Autism Act NI 2011 requirement for an autism awareness campaign has been replaced by an optional in-house intranet exercise and coffee mornings instead of implementation of initiatives recommended by the NI Autism Strategy's own Research Advisory Committee. The impact of all of this is best summarised by the reaction to the October 2020 public consultation of the Autism Amendment Bill. The public consultation received in excess of 1,800 responses. The high response rate is a huge indicator of the level of concern. 92% of respondents supported the need for an independent scrutiny mechanism, as they believe that the scrutiny, transparency and research in relation to the autism services is currently inadequate. 95% of respondents supported a cross-departmental accredited autism training strategy, coordinated to target key staff and reduce costly duplication. 94% of respondents highlighted concerns and the need for consistent adult autism services. And similarly, support within the consultation was evident for both assessment and post-diagnostic services to be consistent across trusts. Significantly, there was overwhelming concern that the situation regarding support services had become worse. This obviously corresponds with the lack of investment in leadership, motivation and resources during a period of accelerating prevalence. Another important issue is the current financial cost to families, and private autism diagnosis clinics are on the rise as parents turn in desperation to any service they can to access timely diagnosis and intervention. And many families cannot afford this route and are getting into debt to find answers and to get help. This is damning evidence of the failure of our health and social care sector, which should be free and timely at the point of need for all autistic individuals. Also, the fact that private diagnosis is even recognised by our health and social care trusts, whereas 10 years it wasn't, can only be interpreted as admission of them not having the capacity to meet the need. It should also be noted that a private diagnosis at a private clinic often logically ties families into costly post-diagnostic early interventions. Meanwhile, the post-lottery continues between our 5 health and social care trusts, with families reporting huge service inconsistencies depending on which trust area you live in. So all of these are critical issues that indicate the Autism Act NI 2011 must be strengthened. The Autism Amendment Bill will build upon the 2011 Act by introducing measures to remove the existing barriers to full implementation of the law. Crucially, we need an independent scrutiny mechanism to drive forward future Northern Ireland autism strategies, and this should be in the form of an autism reviewer. I'm just going to outline now the reasons behind the clauses of the bill, Chair, with your blessing. So within Clause 1, the Autism Strategy Consultation and Data, this seeks to ensure autism prevalence data is expanded to include prevalence data on adults as well as children. Currently, the Department of Health data focuses on children only, but we also need to gather adult data to aid future planning and service provision for our autistic adult population. At a time when we have no idea of the number of autistic adults we have, and therefore it's imperative that we develop our current data collection system further. Also, as other parts of the UK are counting adults only, the prevalence rates will be easy to comparatively analyse. At the minute, we're comparing apples and pears, as Northern Ireland's prevalence rates are based on children, whereas England's are based on adults. So moving on to Clause 2, additional components of the autism strategy. This describes the development of an autism training plan for staff across departments and public bodies. This will reduce duplication and increase consistency, coordination and competency across agencies. It will enhance workforce professional development and introduce a tiered strategy from basic awareness training for many to targeted accredited training for the few. Two of the most obvious examples of training would be for teaching staff in Northern Ireland, as well as mental health professionals working with autistic people. The next point within Clause 2 is to develop a regionally consistent early intervention service to ensure a regional consistency of ethics and practice that feeds into the autism training strategy. And we all know that early intervention works and is cost effective as it reduces later dependency on core services. There's also fantastic best practice models out there locally that need to be tapped into and delivered on a regional basis. Clause 2 further suggests the development of a regional information service. As the prevalence rates have risen, so has the imminent need for information and support. The regional information service will ensure consistency of advice and signpost autistic adults and families to local services within their area. It should be available through a number of media to accommodate different circumstances, for example, via telephone, in person or virtually. Finally, Clause 2 also outlines the focus with which adult services must be developed, and combined with Clause 3 ensures regional consistency, meaning the development of a regionally consistent range of adult support services. The extension of data relating to adults will improve the capacity to map need. For example, as only 16% of autistic adults are in full-time employment, which is less than half of the total figure of the disability sector, we can all agree that this is an area that needs to be invested and developed further. Social opportunities are also needed, as so many adults feel misunderstood, alone and unsupported. This is evidenced by the very stark fact that an autistic adult is 9 times more likely to complete suicide than a neurotypical adult. And I believe that the lack of support services and opportunities may be contributing to this terrible figure. Turn to Clause 3, methodology of the autism strategy along with regional consistency. The autism strategy must have measurable targets and outcomes to measure effectiveness. This speaks for itself. Ultimately, any truly effective strategy must be measurable, and to assess success and what improvements and changes need to be made to achieve overall aims. The strategy should be the basis for ongoing transparency and accountability, and will be an essential tool for the autism reviewer. Along with the general duty to consult introduced in Clause 1, Clause 3 includes a specific obligation to consult organisations when setting measurable targets. The autism strategy therefore must be developed in consultation with the autistic community. This is again self-evident. Nobody knows the needs of autistic community better than autistic people and their families, as well as community and voluntary sector that represent them. The fourth clause, the annual autism funding reports, creates a new requirement of the Minister to lay before the Assembly a report from all departments, setting out how funding for autism has taken account of the NI autism strategy, the needs of autistic individuals, the current prevalence rates, and the potential for partnerships with autism rights bodies. This amendment will address the failure by all departments to bid for investment to progress the NI autism strategy previously. It will also evidence the matching of data against investment. For example, is rising prevalence of autism being matched with rising investment? The final clause I want to highlight is clause 5, the autism reviewer, which creates a requirement to set up an independent scrutiny mechanism, which will be known as the autism reviewer, who will have the following duties. And that's to monitor the effectiveness of the NI autism strategy and to advise the Assembly, to assess the effectiveness of the funding arrangements in respect of autism, to review the adequacy and effectiveness of the law and practice relating to autism, to review the adequacy and effectiveness of services provided for autistic individuals and their families, to commission independent research, and to issue a report annually to the Department, which must be then laid before the Assembly. I propose the appointment of an autism reviewer with a budget allocation similar to that of the mental health champion, but with duties that protect the independence of that post from departmental influence or interference. A budget for research is an essential component to guarantee service and cost effectiveness. These measures and the accountability that will be generated from the requirement placed on the Department to submit an annual autism funding analysis to this Assembly will address proven concerns over the lack of objective scrutiny, accountability and motivation in the implementation of autism legislation. Thank you. I know that was a bit lengthy, but thank you, Chair, for listening. And between us, we will be very happy to take questions.
No bother, Pam. That's very comprehensive briefing for the committee. I'm going to kick off just with a couple of questions. One of the frustrations that's expressed quite often is the lack of cooperation between education and health in terms of the provision of autism services. And I'm just wondering how you see this bill, if it were to be enacted, how it would enhance cooperation between those two departments. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. And I think Arlene might want to come in on this one, but I think the Autism Review will be essential in making sure that the original Autism Act actually is implemented. I mean, what we're really looking at is a 10-year-old piece of legislation, a good piece of legislation, very good piece of legislation, which hasn't come to fruition the way it should have. And really what this additional private members bill will do will bolster that legislation and make it work. So the Autism Review would have a very important role in ensuring that this does happen across departments, and of course there will be the onus then on the departments to lay reports to the Assembly as well. But Arlene might want to come on that point.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. I just really to reinforce what Pam has said, the Autism Reviewer is crucial in this. What has happened in the past has been that the Department of Health has appointed coordinators, and those coordinators funded by the Department of Health have had no authority to implement cross-departmental advice, motivation, etc., reviews. Although there has been an implementation panel with representatives from each department. But as I say, the Autism Reviewer is crucial in making sure that the promise that's set out in the original Act comes to be. So really those are my only comments, unless somebody else has anything to add.
And just on the reviewer, Arlene, what is the process for that reviewer to be appointed?
I think that's to be decided. But I know in the debate in the chamber, the second reading, some of the members did actually pick up on the point of the crucial point of that autism is a responsibility of all departments, and therefore the funding, any funding should be cross-departmental, should be the executive funding. So I think that is potentially the route for the sort of the money trail in terms of that. I think a number of ideas have been floated about the placement of the Autism Reviewer within the system, but that discussion is ongoing. And, so I look, and I'm sure obviously the bill sponsor looks forward to having those ongoing discussions. I know that I am aware of the ministerial appointment system, and I find it a very vulnerable system, because the minister appoints and the minister can discharge. So some way, like I suppose, having been involved in the original legislation, I just feel that there needs to be some very strong protection around the independence of the autism reviewer if they are to be effective. And that's one of the reasons why Pam has stressed the research budget, because we need to find answers, and we need to find objective answers to the questions that are puzzling us at the moment, instead of going round and round in circles, which we have been doing. In terms of the postcode lottery that Pam's referred to, and the inconsistencies between the trusts. Everybody knows there are questions, but nobody seems to be, charged with finding the answers. And I think, again, we're back to the reviewer, who would have a cross-departmental role.
Okay. Thanks for that, Arlene. I just wanted to move on to another issue in relation to the mandatory training of school staff. And I know this bill extends that beyond schools. However, I want to focus on the issue of mandatory training for teachers and for school staff. I want to make it clear, it's not just teachers that need to be trained. And we've heard some harrowing evidence at the committee over recent times in regard to the issue of control and restraint, particularly of autistic children. And on occasions, you'll be aware, Pam, with the issue of stimming. When children make repetitive movements and so on when they come under some stress, and in some cases actually being restrained by teachers, physically restrained, which in my view is unacceptable. But in any event, you know that the Assembly passed a motion last year supporting the issue of mandatory training, and initially the then Education Minister agreed with it. However, he later changed his mind on the issue of mandatory training. I'm wondering, do you have any insight into the current Education Minister's view on that issue? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, it's a really important point, and I'm pretty sure my name was on that motion for the mandatory autism training of all teachers and classroom assistants. I think it is really, really important. And we know there has been progress in terms of increased training, but I think we all still want to see that mandatory training happen. Now, my understanding is that the issues around making it mandatory were around the resource required to free up teachers' time, teacher cover, in order to have for that training to be rolled out. But it's still something that needs to be done, and certainly in my view, I think it's of utmost importance. And I haven't had an opportunity yet to speak to the current Education Minister about that, but I think as an all-party group, I imagine we will be writing directly to the Minister to seek more clarity on that rollout of training, because it is vital. And you've mentioned rightly seclusion and restraint, and we know, again, early intervention works, and if you have that the right level of training for autism, that could absolutely prevent some of these scenarios arising at all. So we do want to see that training rolled out in the near future. And on a mandatory basis, I think is really still required. I don't know if either Kerry or Kelly want to comment on that point.
Yeah, through the all-party group at Autism, as well as the Autism and I, as well as yourselves, the Education Committee, have actually written to, at the time, Peter Weir, asking about why the mandatory teacher training wasn't rolled out as we thought it would be. He agreed it back. Well, the debate was back in January 2020, whenever there was a unanimous agreement that we should be looking into introducing this. And the Minister Weir at the time, replied to say that he had introduced more training. So there is more autism training than there was before. However, it's all online at the minute. It's virtual and it's not interactive. And obviously it's not mandatory. So it's within the teaching staff's own time where they can access this, which is great that there's more, obviously, training than there's ever been. It's more accessible. However, it's still not mandatory. And with 1 in 22 school-age children who are now in any classroom in Northern Ireland, we need to ensure that those teaching staff understand that child's autism and they're able to support them. And those kids are able to be given the same opportunities as any other children in the classroom. It's where the child spends, I keep saying this over and over again, where a child spends the majority of their day. And that person looking after them and supporting them needs to understand them. And I feel that it still needs to be mandatory. And, you know, we can't stop as a charity. And I'm sure the all-party group agree with us too, until this is brought in, until it is mandatory. And we feel that the PMB will definitely strengthen the chances of this being brought in as mandatory autism training.
Thanks for that, Carrie. And could I just ask one of you, has there been any discussion or conversation with the trade unions around the issue of mandatory training? Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, there has been over the past couple of years. There hasn't been recently now, but whenever we did the campaign up in Stormont for the introduction of mandatory teacher training, the Ulster Teachers Union actually spoke at it. And at that time, we were told that most of the trade unions were in support of it. But subsequently, I think there were various discussions. Some of them said that they weren't in support of it. I don't really understand why. Because I can tell you now that our helpline takes over 6,000 calls a year. There's a lot of teachers that come to training on a Saturday morning and pay for it themselves to basically, well, they don't do it now, obviously they do it virtually, but they were doing it just to be able to understand the children in their classroom. The helpline as well takes so many calls from teachers wanting extra support and help. And any teacher that I've spoken to all want this training. So I don't really understand where the trade unions are coming from, whether it's another issue about taking on extra training in general. I personally think that's what it is. I don't think it's about the autism training, so to speak. However, I don't know any teachers, and Kelly, who runs the helpline here at Autism and I, will be able to explain to you the amount of teachers that call through. Kelly?
The helpline, as Kerry said, receives over 6,000 calls from autistic individuals, parents and carers, and teachers. In that regard, they past restraint and seclusion should be avoided at all costs, and will equip people with strategies and skills earlier that hopefully prevent things from going wrong. But what we do need, and what our teachers tell us, is that they need that time and resources invested from DE and EA, that actually they also want to see a culture change. We can't continue the same thing without making improvements. We're just spending money inefficiently. So if we are committed and we want to invest in them to reach the full educational potential that increases outcomes and turns the curve across the lifespan, then we've got to invest in training and make it mandatory.
Okay, thanks for that, Kelly. And I'm going to open up to questions from members now. And could I just advise members that I'll probably have to be more strict on this session. We have fallen behind time a bit. So I'm going to ask Diane to come in first. Are you there, Diane?
Yes. Can I say thank you to everyone for the contributions on the bill? And I think that this is a really hugely important piece of work. When I talk to local teachers, I find that dealing with children who are somewhere on the autism spectrum is one of the most difficult issues that they have. Also in getting appropriate help for those children. So the bill I mean, we're looking at some of the mandatory training that the teachers would have. But I find actually that one of the issues is actually dealing with the Education Authority. How would the bill impact on awareness training for those within the Education Authority and the wider, if you like to say, I don't want to say ancillary, I don't know what other word to use for it, that wider group of people who support those who are in primary roles, looking after and educating young people with autism. And I'm sure this is reflected across all of the political spectrum. I have a huge number of parents who contact me about lack of facilities, lack of access for their children to mainstream education. Transport issues has been a particular issue in Upper Bann over the last year. And sometimes when I talk to people, the awareness of what children can or cannot do and what is safe for them to do is entirely lacking. And I'm going to be specific on this issue. I mean, is it safe to expect parents to organise their own transport for children who are autistic, but for whom the Education Authority refused to organise transport? I mean, these are the kind of practical issues that come into a constituency office. And I would like the bill to have an impact that is as wide as possible, is the honest truth, in explaining and in training.
Thank you, Dan. I think that's really useful contribution. I suppose what you're doing is actually highlighting the necessity of this bill, because, you know, we need to have training provision to all departments and all public bodies. And it's not about training people to deal with individuals with autism. It's about training everybody to treat everybody in a different way, which is inclusive of people with autism. So I think that's a really important point that you make, and we're looking forward to seeing what the calls for evidence that have come from the Health Committee, what that brings, and what added value that will bring, or suggested amendments to the proposed bill as it stands. So we obviously have dates in the diary for October to slots in the Health Committee to hear from other interested individuals on the bill and see what comes from that. But it is really vital that the training is rolled out across all departments, and that is the whole point. The bill hasn't been, the original Autism Act hasn't been implemented, and that has been the problem here, where we've seen that there have been no bids for funding across any of the departments for new funding for autism in the last 10 years since the original Act was introduced. So that's where it seems to have fallen down and hasn't been implemented or acted upon, and that's what we want to see happen. I don't know if either Kerry or Arlene want to come in the back of that.
Yep, just very, very briefly, just to wrap it up. You know, the comment about training within education, the amendment, the Autism Amendment Act, refers to the Northern Ireland the need for an autism strategy, a Northern Ireland autism training strategy. So that's about addressing duplication. That's about making economic choices, but efficient choices. It's about assessing the need across departments for training and the tiered system of delivery that Pam referred to earlier. Just wanted to include that comment. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. That's me. I've finished, Chair. Hello.
Thank you, Diane. Sorry, I was on mute. Daniel McCrossan.
Yes, Chair. How are you doing?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Pam, thank you for that detailed presentation, and to Arlene and Kelly as well. This is a very important piece of legislation, one that I am wholly and absolutely in support of, and looking forward to help shape to ensure that we have all the gaps or potential gaps filled to ensure that the needs and interests of those with autism in Northern Ireland are met. I have to say some of the details that you've shared are extremely interesting. And there's a lot of people that are engaging and interested in this particular piece of legislation, Pam, so well done for taking this further. The bill makes provision for mandatory autism training for teachers and classroom assistants, which I believe is a significant number of people a significant number of people fully support this for good reasons. However, some sincere people are fearful that as a result of the concentration on autism, other special educational needs may be inadvertently neglected through a lack of response or resource for teachers. So what would you say to this, and can you allay their fears in any way?
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for your kind. I suppose what I would point is that the original Autism Act is an act in law which hasn't been enacted upon. So it's not that we are actually introducing something completely different. What is in place or the inaction that is there on the bill is not right, is not correct, and needs to be addressed. This is about strengthening the original act. This is not about discriminating or competing with other conditions or anything like that. This is about actually making a piece of legislation which is already there, it's in law, making it work and making it act and making lives better for everyone. So there's no competition here. This is about enacting legislation that's already in place, and that's right and proper. So I wouldn't want to get too distracted by the argument of what about this and what about that. This is about making improvements and lives better for all of us who live with autism.
Yeah, okay. The requirement for mandatory training will initially involve somewhere in the region of 18,000 teachers. There will also be around substitute teachers plus members of classroom assistants. Do you see other school staff receiving this training to, for example, building supervisors and school secretaries? Should they also be trained? And also, do you have any idea how much this will cost initially, or have you discussed with the minister or the department where the resources necessary will come from?
So we haven't had recent conversations with the Education Minister, but I know the previous Education Minister had expressed, or his department officials had expressed concerns around the cost of the mandatory rollout. And that, I believe, is why we haven't gotten to that point yet. But I think there should be an overall commitment by all executive parties to recognise that this is not an issue simply for education. This is cross-departmental. The Autism Act was cross-departmental, and this is not something that the full burden of cost should be placed against one particular department. I think, as I said earlier, early intervention, we all know works. We know training will help. I mean, this really, in reality, should actually save money, in terms of intervention and improving lives and skilling individuals to live a full, fulfilled, happy, productive life.
Yeah, okay. How long do you think it'll take to roll out the training?
Kerry, do you want to come on that one?
I think you could do it. I'm just looking up, sorry, while you're talking there, old proposals we've spoken to whenever Peter Weir was the Minister for Education. We had meetings with him. We'd already went through sort of costings, and they were minimal. But I think the biggest issue is getting the staff to be able to take that time off. And what we had suggested is if they could use one of their baker days to do that. But then we were told that each school it's up to them what they choose to use their Baker Days for, what they choose to be trained up on. And then obviously our response was, but could you not, sort of influence them into using one of them for autism? And we were told no. So I think the main issue is getting staff having that time available to train them up. It's not about the actual cost of training them up, so to speak. And yes, I was looking up what we proposed as Autism Now, because we're a training provider ourselves. And I know you've got Middletown sitting there waiting to go, which should be doing it. And we were saying there's 11,000 or 1,200 schools, in Northern Ireland approximately. And we think you could do it in 3 years with how many staff? Let me just check here. I'm just looking at it here. So we're looking at 3 full-time staff, and we think you could do it in 3 years. And then it'll be obviously on a rolling where they'd have to be refreshed every 3 years as well. But yeah, we could, Middletown ourselves, we could drop a proposal tomorrow. It's more getting the commitment from the minister to do this, plus making sure that schools will do it within their time, within one of those Baker Days. It's about because we've been through this a million times, Daniel. Same questions asked over and over again. Yeah. We don't know what to, it's not a cost. It's not a big cost. It's more the time off that the teachers need to do it.
Well, and just in relation to the time off.
Daniel, could you finish off quickly, please? Yeah. Thank you.
No problem, Chair. Just in relation to the time off, and I know that's important, and I do believe that could be resolved quite easily, but have we the capacity and expertise at this moment in time to provide the training?
Yes. Middletown sitting there, they could do it. Autism Now could do it. We could do it tomorrow. We just need the go-ahead to do it, and the funding. And I don't think the funding is the least of your worries, because the costs are minimal. Really, it's the cost of trainers to do it. But it's again, I do think it's a time off, Daniel. I don't know. That's what we were told anyway over the past 2 years.
And very briefly, could the training be accredited in any way?
Yes, it could be. Yeah. Okay. Definitely. And yes, there could be different levels, as Arlene's already said, about, with other things, but there could also be different levels where the teachers could have different types of training than the likes of the dinner ladies or whoever else is helping around the school, or the receptionists and that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Carrie, for that. And thanks, Daniel. I'd invite Robin to come in now. Are you there, Robin?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And can I first of all apologise to Pam and the delegates for my unstable network connection, which doesn't allow me to see you. For you, it's an advantage, but I'm unable to see you at the moment. But can I thank Pam for the very detailed outline of her bill? And I know how passionate she is, and the passion with the others is obviously there as well. So I welcome the bill as it's going through. I want to say, Chair, I don't really want to ask any questions on the matter, except to say that I am an enthusiastic supporter of work experience for our young people. And apart from in the pandemic, I would have pupils every year in my office or working with me. I'm particularly keen, and have been particularly keen, to take and offer opportunities for boys with autism. And I have seen the problems that they have endured, and I have seen the talents of some of the young people. And it was only by coincidence that there was one who has just left my office at the moment. He was fortunate in that he got good school support. He has came to me on 2 occasions for work experience. We've kept in contact with each other. And indeed, he's in the office because he's telling me that he's got a good job in Scotland that he's heading off to start next week. So we look at young people, and I do know about the breadth of autism, but we do look at young people who have autism, but we sometimes neglect the potential that those young people have to make a full contribution, in fact, a very, very positive contribution to our society. So I'm enthusiastic about addressing the matter, and I really do hope that the bill is successful and indeed makes a contribution to the quality of life for not just those who have got the autism, but indeed everyone in the family that surrounds them. Thanks, Pam. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, can I just thank Robin for his very kind comments there? And I think that really sums up the intention of this private members bill, because I think it's right and proper that we value every member of society, and many of us have autism and live with autism, and autism is part of us, and that is not necessarily a negative thing at all. So I think we need to embrace that as a fact and ensure that provision and help is there so that we can all live out our lives in all fullness, and I think it's right and proper that we do that, and that we make this good piece of legislation from 10 years ago better and make it work.
Okay, thanks for that, Pam. And I'd invite Robbie Butler to come in now with a question. You there, Robbie?
I am.
Give us 5 minutes if possible, Robbie. Thanks.
I will indeed, yeah. I've been a participant on the APG since 2016, but sadly I have not been able to attend very many in this past sort of 12 months or so. Congratulations to Kelly, Kerry, Arlene and Pam, and I also will have to mention Eileen, who's no longer part of the APG now, but also was a stalwart and journeyed with us. But Pam, congratulations as the chair, and you've worked with a very energised and good APG, and it's really, really, really good to see this in the chamber recently and talk about it. I'll keep my comments very brief, Chair. Guys, I don't know if it was maybe Arlene or Pam talked about this, the regionally inconsistent approach to autism, and I see that very much with ADHD as well. But this is the Education Committee. Is there any take on a regionally consistent approach in the educational sector, either geographically or by sector, or has there been any look at that, or are we generally content that it's maybe it might not be brilliant, but it's kind of even and everybody has the same approach?
I'll let probably Kerry or Kelly come in on that.
Kelly, do you want to answer that about, obviously the parents are coming through to the helpline, so what is your take on that? Is it pretty much the same throughout Northern Ireland?
We mentioned earlier, take over 6,000 calls on the helpline. The experience of autistic individuals and their families, they describe the education system as a battle. It's the reason the mandatory training for all teaching staff is required. And certainly we know that we have significant numbers of autistic children and parents having to go to tribunal in order to access support and access their right to education. So, I think each family's experience is different. Whilst there might be a regional framework, the stress and the impact on whole family units is different.
Yeah, I would agree, Robbie. It's basically the same things we're hearing throughout Northern Ireland, no matter where anyone is, that a lot of children are on reduced timetables, which I don't think is recorded. We did a quick survey in 2015 in Autism and I. It was only 120 parents, but 2/3 of them said their kids were on reduced timetables.
Okay.
And that's going on. We also know about social opportunities, kids not being allowed to go on school trips and things like that. We hear that so it doesn't really matter where they're based. I think it's the same throughout, and we think teacher training, understanding will improve all of that, obviously.
I totally agree. With regard to the availability of statementing and stuff, obviously EA are going through a significant change and have done it over this past 18 months. And I mean, I could say that I feel that they have made great grounds, and have caught up quite a bit in terms of the backlog that was there for statementing and issues like that. Would you agree with that? And where do you see that at the moment? Because obviously, when people are waiting for lengthy times on a statement and so on, it puts increased pressure on the home and also on the child. Would you agree that we're in a better place today with regard to that?
Yeah, I think Kelly will agree that the statements now are being done within the time period. How long they can hold out for that, because they seem to be under an awful lot of pressure to get those done within that time period. Kelly, do you have anything to add to that? I
think the other thing will be, are we in a better place? I would struggle to say yes, because we've had COVID-19.
Yep.
We have autistic individuals and their families disproportionately affected by that. We don't have mandatory training in place, and if we really want a whole school approach to change that enables our autistic individuals to reach their full potential, then we require the mandatory training that's going to provide the skills and the strategies that they need to access education.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that. Can I ask you a cheeky question then, as the chair of the party group on ADHD then? In terms of the training, I think we've been around a bit of the chat on this previously, guys. Obviously, ADHD is a very prevalent issue for a lot of young people too. Has there been any scope to look in terms of the mandatory training and teacher awareness that there are elements of other conditions like ADHD?
You mean to bring it in, Robbie, with the autism training?
Well, yeah, because as you guys will understand and I will understand, people very, very often think that they're the same thing when they're absolutely not.
No.
And you know, and they're two separate entities. But you have the young people who have the comorbidities, if you like, and have both, and so on. And so there is an expertise that's required to identify the prevalent issue that needs to be addressed and those type of things. So it's quite complex in trying to find that individualized plan sometimes. So, you know, and if we're looking at a pupil-centred approach.
I think, could I maybe just say that, revert to the comment that Pam made, this is about strengthening the original legislation and making sure that it's implemented. So, you know, forgive me for having tunnel vision for autism, but having said that, I'm a great sort of advocate of, you know, like I do believe, like my experience tells me, but time moves on, that a lot of the strategies that are, you know, would be included in the training for teachers who are working with children and young people with autism are generically applicable. So, you know, so there will be a generic benefit to a range of children, you know, who have anxiety issues, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not, you know, although I say I have tunnel vision, and but I do feel that, yeah, you know, have to revert to the fact that the Autism Amendment Act or bill is about strengthening legislation that's already in place, and that's where our focus has been. But yes,
I do think,
humanly speaking, yeah.
I think you do yourself a disservice. You've tunnel vision. I think you're passionate about the you know, about making a difference, and I think you're you know, I think, but I do understand what you say, Arlene. We'll tease a wee bit more out as the bill comes through. I have a final question, Pat, because I know you only give me 5 minutes. So in terms of the longitudinal piece, and we'd pivoted on before, and it was looking at those pathways into employment. Autistic adults probably only make up around about 16% of the working population in some of the studies. What will the bill achieve in terms of that longitudinal piece for autistic people through education and then into the lifelong workplace and workspace?
Do you want that for Arlene?
Basically,
who's going to answer this? It's within basically, Rob. It's within this autism amendment bill, the PMB, specifically in there about employment. Our big passion is obviously to see as many autistic adults as possible within employment who can go into employment. It's 16% is less than half the number of the disability sector that's in employment, and obviously it's nearly a third. And obviously it's completely, baffling to us why in this day in 2021 we've got so little autistic adults in any type of employment. One of the areas of the PMB is about employment, where we want to see more employers trained up in autism understanding and being able to employ more people with autism. And within the current autism strategy, there is areas within that, but it's not quantifiable. And this is one of the big issues about the current autism strategy and why we need this amendment bill to come in. It needs to be quantitative and qualitative, and we need to see on an OBA model, we need to see change happening. And one of the areas would be to see more adults with autism in employment. And we want to see it specifically, we want to see a quantifiable number of that as well. And it would be about working with employers, obviously, to employ more adults with autism. And this is a lifelong Autism Act. We know that autism doesn't stop at the age of 18, and we don't want to see adults with autism sitting in their bedrooms or their parents worrying about their mental health, because we know an adult with autism is 9 times more likely to complete suicide than a neurotypical. We know all of this, and we know the reason for this, because they're probably not getting up every day to go to work. They don't have anything to focus on. So it's within the new PMB as well. So it's all of the departments working together to give that lifelong support.
Brilliant. That's really good. Really appreciate that answer, Carrie. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Nicola, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Thanks, everyone, for your attendance here this afternoon. Pam, I am widely supportive of this bill. I spoke on the debate at the second stage, and I do think it's a great bill. I think there's some things I could at least ask you about, on it, but I do really appreciate that you put the effort in to bring it before the Assembly. And 2 points I suppose I want to make. About, first of all, early intervention, and then about the regional information service. I think those are 2 really key aspects of the bill. Early assessment and early diagnosis, and then early intervention is key for young children with autism and for the families and carers. And I think that's something that really is a massive issue at the minute, and as well as that, the delay, the delay in assessment and the disparity between the trusts is really, really frustrating. The fact that just depending on where you live, you'll get a certain level of service. So I'm glad that's being kind of focused on. And again, I think that relates to the information service that's available. As I said before in the chamber, it is a complete minefield for parents of young children with autism especially, about where to turn to, what services are there, what their kind of first steps are. It is a complete maze. So any kind of additional help for them, for people with autism and for professionals would be really helpful for them. For this, I just want to kind of move on to the reviewer. First of all, I want to know if a sole reviewer is sufficient in your opinion, and have you considered the use of a review panel instead?
Thanks, Nicola. I suppose thank you for your comments, and thank you for your support on the bill and for speaking on it at the second reading. That was much appreciated. And of course, the absolute thanks have to go to the entirety of the all-party group who have been passionate on with the incredible support of people like Dr. Cassidy and Kerry and Kelly in Autism NI. We have managed to keep this subject alive for an incredible period of time. It's a very successful APG, and really this legislation has come absolutely on the back of the work of the APG. So I think it's a wonderful piece of cross-party working to the benefit of everybody in Northern Ireland. So just to put that on record. I suppose in terms of the reviewer model versus panel, the simple answer is I don't know yet. We are about to commence with taking evidence at Health Committee, which I'm on obviously as Vice Chair, and it'll be interesting to see what comes of that and what contributions others have to make on the private members bill, and what other amendments may come forward or suggestions are made. So I think we're open to looking at all types of options. We basically want to make this original act work in its entirety, and that is really the aim of this private members bill, is to make the original act work and work well. And that is the aim. We were very conscious that we didn't want to add additional burden financially to an already very difficult scenario around health provision. So we were very conscious we didn't put in for an all singing, all dancing commissioner kind of expensive model. We were trying to look at something that practically does the job, and that's how we ended up with that recommendation that we look at a reviewer role within the implementation of the Autism Act. So I think it's all up for grabs at this point. I think there are more conversations to be had. We've just passed the second reading, and now we're into looking at more detail. So I think we're all just looking forward to seeing what comes out of that and what suggestions are there, and see what the departments have to say as well.
Thanks for that, Pam. I think that's fair enough, and obviously you want to keep the cost as low as possible, but I'm glad that you're open to the idea of a review panel, because I think it's actually a good suggestion, and it could really work well. Just as a follow-up to that, what kind of enforcement powers do you see either a reviewer or a review panel kind of having if made available?
Thanks, Nicola. Sorry, I was just struggling to get off mute there. Again, in terms of I'm not sure about the enforcement powers, or whether they're enforcement.
Well, the enforcement powers would be, Pam, the legislation itself. Yes. And can I just say, Nicola, I know you're talking about a panel of people. We have had a panel for the past 10 years of different people taking charge of this strategy, and I feel going forward that we probably need one person with a team working with them to implement this, to get this done. We've waited too long. We can't wait any longer. Been waiting 10 years for something to be done. And if you look at only 1 out of 3 action plans have been completed. And I know I repeated this during the Health Committee too. I feel personally, listening to thousands of families throughout Northern Ireland for the past 12 years, somebody needs to take the reins here. And they need to be solely responsible, like the mental health champion, like all the different commissioners, but this isn't a commissioner job. This is somebody solely to ensure that the strategy gets done. And I think that needs to be one person. And I think the enforcement will be them ensuring that the legislation is actually done. And sorry, Arlene, you've got a bigger memory than I do about all of this.
I'm just sorry, Arlene. Just very, very, very quickly, just to let you know that they have done a panel. So we're basically running out of options in terms of alternative ideas, because the original strategy had 3 implementation structures set down in the strategy. There was a research committee, there was a senior officers committee, and in the middle there was a multidisciplinary panel. And initially that multidisciplinary panel, it was, as well as including representatives from each department who were responsible for taking the strategy on in their own departments. Initially, there were people with autism on it, there were representatives from autism organisations on it, and then the panel was reconstituted without some of the stakeholders present in terms of autism organisations. So I think there was maybe one person with autism or a parent. So there has been a panel structure. I know there are panels and then there are panels, so it's all about duties and obligations. So I go back to what Pam has said. It's there for discussion as this bill evolves, and as other people put their heads together alongside Pam. Thank you. That's it.
Thanks, Arlene. And Kerry, just back to your point, listen, I'm sure we're all in agreement here that we want changes to be made. We're all singing from the same hymn sheet here. We know that people with autism and their families and carers need the support. So we all want to see that there, but it's about finding the right way, and that's why we're having these discussions and why we need everyone's opinions to be taken on board. The other point I wanted to raise, Robbie's already touched upon it, so about helping people with autism, the kind of part of that their 14 to 19-year-old strategy, and encouraging them into the workforce and what kind of support we can have. So I think that's a really important avenue to discuss as well. But I know we're short in time, so I'll leave it there for today. But thank you all for attending and for all the information. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Nicola. And Justin, would you like to ask some questions?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Hi, Kerry. Hi, Arlene. Hi, Kelly. Arlene, how did you describe the Act as brought forward by my predecessor, Dominic Bradley, local Bestwick man? How did you describe that Act?
Well, apart from being in terms of it being a landmark piece of legislation, it's the most comprehensive, lifelong, cross-departmental, single disability equality legislation in Europe and in the world. There was legislation brought in. There's an Autism Act in England, but it only impacts on adults, whereas ours is lifelong. So there's other pieces of legislation across the world, but the Autism Act that Dominic drafted, and Autism and I were involved in lobbying and campaigning for and working alongside him with, was so comprehensive that's what made it unique. So that's why hopes were high and hopes were disappointed, and we are where we are.
Okay, well, I'm very proud of my predecessor, Dominic Bradley's work on that, but I'm disappointed at the same time that the Act hasn't delivered on its full potential, let's just say.
Justin, could I just add, in the presentation that Pam made and that I made earlier, not to take away, it's not, things did change because of Dominic's effort. There was no counting, there was no data, there was no government-owned data, and that legislation brought that in. Also, it changed DDA, so autism was recognised, so suddenly it had a seat at the disability table. And some things started to change in terms of reasonable adjustments, for people with autism. So change did happen. The things that didn't happen was the strategy that was within that legislation, because that was handed over to a lead department, and that lead department that was responsible for that. Whether it underestimated the fact that it was in charge of a cross-departmental strategy, and therefore a lot of effort needed to be made in terms of working cross-departmentally. Anyway, we are where we are in terms of that not being part of that legislation that wasn't implemented. So, yes, I obviously I agree with you, but it's not all doom and gloom.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's why this new legislation is so important. That's why we've got to be grateful to Pamela for bringing that forward. And on that, Pamela, Pam, I'm calling you Pamela. Sorry, apologies, Pam. On that, Pam, I want to give you forewarning that I've spoken to the Bill office, and I want to make an amendment which will involve the inclusion of a note to ensure that there is opportunities for participation in organised sport for children and young people and adults, because I've recently witnessed the impact that it's had. I've mentioned that at the last stage of the bill in the House. I've seen how positively that impacts children and young people. I think that provision should be contained within the strategy, so I hope that we'll get cross-party support on that. And just a slight amendment in terms of not just for the needs of adults, the needs of children and adults. So well done in bringing forward this legislation. Well done in terms of Kerry and Kelly and Arlene in terms of support you provided. One note, I did ask the Health Minister recently a question on the numbers of people with individuals who have received a diagnosis in Northern Ireland. And there are very stark figures for children. Since 2014, Between 1st of April 2014 and 30th of June 2021, 14,059 children have received a diagnosis of autism. For the period of 1st of April 2017 to 30th of June 2021, 630 adults. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of identifying adults who have autism in the North area. So listen, I have no further questions. I want to say well done and best of luck going forward. I think everybody's on board with this, but it's now about delivering for children and adults with autism so they can really fulfil their full potential.
Thank you,
folks.
Thank you, Justin. And could say you're welcome to call me Pamela. It's on my birth certificate, so that's fine. But yes, you're absolutely right. And I think we can't get past the importance of actually collecting the data and doing research on this topic. And I think that is really necessary going forward, because we can't begin to provide and support if we don't actually know what we need to do, or what kind of numbers or what the scenarios are that we're dealing with. So it's really important that we do gather that data, and that is part of this bill as well. So thank you for your comments, thank you for your support, and thank you for the good work of your party colleagues in the past in leading on this issue. And I'm very proud to be heading up that all party group, and I will continue to say that this is a good piece of cross-party work amongst us all. That's something that the entirety of the Assembly could be proud of if we can get this passed. And we look forward to working with you and seeing what comes of your amendment in terms of the sporting side of things. So thank you for your contribution.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pam, and thanks, Justin. Harry, would you like to come in now?
Thank you very much, Chair. Indeed, I will briefly. And thank you, Pam, your team and your group for bringing this bill and for your attendance today. There's been some detail in relation to the role of the reviewer, and in terms of funding, I presume the reviewer would be able to make comment upon the levels of funding and allocation, but wouldn't hold any power themselves to make a funding direction. Would this fall to executive to address if underfunding was a problem? Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. I suppose you've probably gone into more detail than we've actually gotten to yet. I think we're at the stage where the Assembly agreed that this bill could go to committee stage so that we could get into the nitty-gritty and get more detail and suggestions about how we go forward with the bill. So I think that's all up for discussion, and it all needs to be worked out how that would happen. But I would like to think that the entirety of the Northern Ireland Assembly, so that the executive would have a responsibility in terms of funding, in recognition that this is very much a cross-departmental issue and it's a lifelong issue. So it's something that needs to be addressed by all departments. So I would like to think that the executive would, if necessary, take on responsibility if that is needed in terms of finances.
Yep, okay, and thank you. And just quickly too, moving on, what form do you emphasise the early intervention service taking? Will it be more centred around general practice, or will it be something provided for by the trusts?
Kerry, do you want to come on that? I mean, I think it's probably much wider than that, because we're talking about autism being an issue across all departments.
Yeah, it's more. We're looking for, Pam, I'm sure you agree. At the minute, whenever a child gets a diagnosis of autism, there starts, there's maybe 2 years to get that diagnosis in the first place. Well, it's quite common, there's 2 years. So during that time, child's developing, they're getting older. Straight after diagnosis, then, they have to wait again to get early intervention. And what the Trust gives in different areas throughout Northern Ireland is completely different. So depending on where you live in Northern Ireland, depends on how good a service you're getting with early intervention. And as you all know, I'm sure as MLAs you've heard it a million times, early intervention is key, and particularly with autism, getting in there at the start, putting in structure and strategies is really important. And there's lots of good models sitting there already. Autism Now has a fantastic early intervention service that we provide with the trust, but it's getting in there straight away and getting that support put in for that family. But it needs to be obviously uniform throughout Northern Ireland. Some trusts do it very well, some trusts do it not so well. And that's what we talk about the postcode lottery. And this is why we feel that this is a really important element of the PMB, because a lot of people focus on the diagnosis waiting times. That's only the start of the journey. The main issue is actually getting support and services in there straight after diagnosis. And that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you all very much. And thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Harry. And that's the end of our questions. I want to thank you all for coming in today. It's been very useful, and you know yourself, Pam, there's wide support for this bill going through the Assembly, and we'll look forward to seeing it on the floor of the Assembly very soon. And I agree with you. It would be a feather in the cap of the whole Assembly if this legislation was to get through, and I'm sure it will. So once again, thanks to everyone, Carrie, Arlene, Kelly, and Pam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.
Can I ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove the witnesses and add the members back into the spotlight, please? Thanks. And can I ask the clerk to summarise any actions or requests arising from that session?
Chair, I think we can write to the new Minister for an update position on the letter that's in your packs of the 5th of May 2021, and then also ask the Education Authority what actions it will take to implement training provisions of the bill as it's a public body. Then over and above that, I would suggest that we provide the start of today's discussion to the Health Committee and relevant correspondence so that that can inform the committee stage of the autism bill.
Has everyone agreed on that? Agreed?
Agreed.
Just leaves me to state that the next scheduled meeting is on Wednesday, the 6th of October 2021 via Starleaf at 9:15. And the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
God bless, kids. Bye.
Thanks. Till later.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room